sur ce chemin en ton absence. J'ai beau trimer, sans toi ma vie n'est qu'un décor qui brille vide de sens. Je remue le ciel, le jour, la nuit. Je danse avec le vent, la pluie. Un peu d'amour.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of this conference on digital humanities organized by IFRA. So my name is Cyrielle Maingraud, and I'm the Deputy Director and Researcher at IFRA. So I have the pleasure to moderate this panel of today with three people who are going to present some projects that they have been running. Two of them are colleagues who are in the United States. The first one is Dr. Ademide Adelusi-Adeluyi, who is an associate professor, and she is going to talk to us about the project that she has on new maps of old Lagos. I don't know if you can show the website. So she has made and created this website with all maps, all maps of Lagos. And also she did a short film about the tramway that used to run in Lagos Island. The second project that we're going to talk about will be presented by Etim, who is also in the United States. It's called the Nigerian Nostalgia Project. So I discovered this project on Instagram, but they also have a website. Yes, it's the okay. If you when you find it, and also, I mean, I really encourage you to follow them on Instagram, like Wizkid actually, who is following them on Instagram. And the third person who is going to present this morning is Olusola Kuti, who is here with us, who is based in Lagos, and he's part of the How Far Nigeria project, that is both a Instagram page as well that I really encourage you to follow, a website, but also a printed magazine that he has some copies of that, you know, we can show you if you're interested. So we wanted to have this panel that is with academics, but also, let's say, public historians or amateur historians, because we also wanted to discuss the use and the role of social media and of the internet in, you know, creating and writing history and public history, and also how we can curate data and information, because I think as academics we are trained to produce a lot of knowledge and to produce a lot of data, but sometimes there is this gap. And I mean, on Instagram, there's a lot of pages on the Caribbean, on Ethiopia, about, you know, showcasing all of these pictures, especially, but also videos of audio. And I think it's a very interesting trend that I wanted to reflect on today. And so building on your experience. Because it might rain very soon, and you know it's always disturbing the network, we're going to start with the panelists that are in the United States. So Ademide, I don't know if you can start. Thank you very much. I know it's very late and early where you are, so thank you again.
Good morning. Thank you, Cyrielle, for this introduction and for setting up this panel. It's late for me, but it's not quite as late as it is for Etim, I know. So he's at least 3 hours later for him. So I'll speak quickly so he can get on next. I'm going to share my screen as well. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. So I can see behind you, not actually in front of you, Cyrielle, but I will share my screen and begin. Okay, great. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming this early for this panel. And thank you, of course, to my co-panelists who are also here. I'm really excited to hear from them and see the work that they're doing, especially using social media, which I think is so important for thinking about how we can think about the past and the present day in Nigeria. So for me as an academic, most of my own research and written work has been for an academic audience. But in the past few years, I've been thinking about how to present my findings more broadly and reach different kinds of audiences with my own research on Lagos in the 19th century. This is where, for me, things like digital and spatial humanities come in as a vehicle to democratize access to knowledge and the topics that we study and who gets to speak about these topics. Can you hear me? I can't tell. Yes, you can. Okay, very good. So as digital projects continue to grow in popularity, traditional concerns that scholars have around evidence and argumentation continue to linger. Some of these questions are quite old for historians of Africa, such as the consequences of relying on European sources to write the histories of places like Lagos. And in response to this, some of us have turned to digital platforms to expand the range, analysis, design, and the presentation of historical research. New Maps of Old Lagos, for instance, the project I work on, is a web-based collection of cartographic narratives focusing on the histories of old Lagos. On this platform, I show how, by using ArcGIS and other mapping tools and other things, timelines, all kinds of things, story maps, we can use indigenous sources as well as European colonial maps and other traditional archival sources as sources that we can use to reconstruct local urban spatial patterns in places like Lagos. This morning, I'm going to discuss some of the work I've done on Lagos's 19th and early 20th century history. I just wanted to add that also, since we're in Ibadan, a lot of this mapping work is really inspired by the work of Professor Akima Bogunje, whose writing and research on cities in Nigeria have been a really important model for scholars like myself. Now, I recently published an article on the issues I'm going to talk about today, so the bulk of my comments will come from what I wrote in that article. If you're interested in seeing that article, especially since I provide more technical and historical detail in it, please contact me. I have my email address on this slide and at the end as well. So I will continue by highlighting some of the questions that guide my own turn to doing public history. Whose city? If I'm thinking about Lagos, whose city is this? How do we know what we know about old Lagos? What are the images of Lagos that we've come to treasure? We're talking about decolonizing knowledge here, but so much of what we know about Lagos is thinking about a colonial more than an indigenous city. For instance, from these images I'm showing you here of the marina, especially thinking about it from the lagoon. Or we may know a little bit about the architecture and infrastructure from the returnees in the 19th century, especially the Brazilian heritage of Lagos in that sense. But I often ask myself as I think of these questions, what about the original inhabitants of Lagos? What about their lives, their infrastructure? And how can we also foreground the experiences of everyday people? I think this is where digital humanities can really come in very handy for us. And I'll skip over some of this stuff that I have here. My own research is on the spatial histories of mid-19th century Lagos, and I'm particularly interested in the ways that Lagos was built and rebuilt between 1845 and 1872. The project I present to you today asks similar questions about history, space, race, and gender, but the answers are directed at a more general audience. I've been trying to answer a lot of these questions through time, and I'll show you some of these answers here. So for instance, when we think of Lagos, we often have these bird's eye views of the 19th century, thinking about the city. So I will show a number of dynamic maps and images and video today. But when I think about the old city itself, before the British came, thinking about indigenous Lagos in the 18th century, the 19th century, we don't have a lot of information, especially not visual information. So I do say in my work, I try to address this blankness that affects the understanding of Lagos, who lived there, what it looked like. And there's an overwhelmingly negative narrative about the city having to be fixed. So part of what I want to feature is how can we think about ordinary inhabitants of Lagos, especially in the 19th century and early 20th century. So part of what I'll do today is show two vignettes two map vignettes from my website. One is about thinking about the old shoreline of Lagos Island, which is an overview here, and also thinking about the story about the old tram network in Lagos. So early digital humanities scholars were really animated by the idea that computational tools, quote, have the potential to transform the content, scope, methodologies, and audience of humanistic inquiry, end quote. Part of what is transformative for us in thinking about Lagos has meant the foregrounding of narratives of everyday people in the city, right? As I showed earlier. Thinking about everyday people over the elite, incorporating indigenous priorities and space into narratives of progress and modernity, while also making methods of analysis more transparent, and while at the same time hoping to broaden the audience outside of academia to include those who are usually boxed in as our, quote, informants, right? So I believe I have about 10 more minutes. So what I'll do is move through these vignettes for you quite quickly. So part of what I do as a historian who's trained academically is I spend most of my time in archival spaces, looking at maps, looking at documents, things like that. But also part of what this digital work has helped me do is really step outside of the archive and be more comfortable in the real city, walking in the city, taking a lot of this research actually to the streets of Lagos Island. And I will move there very quickly, at least on my screen. So thinking about map making as a method for doing digital humanities. As mentioned earlier, I run a public history site called New Maps of Old Lagos. And in this public history site, I platform a number of historical vignettes thinking about how the city was used, inhabited, and moved through in space. And so I look at colonial maps as a really important source that have also been neglected in the way that we think of the city. Now, colonial maps of Lagos are an underused source for the histories of indigenous cities like Lagos in West Africa. These maps that I rely on for my research circulated in different colonial networks and events. Some were confidential, some were used for war, some were even for sale and exhibitions and other things, or were even circulated by missionaries. In my research, these historical maps become one setting where we can begin to stage the analysis, exploration, and the changes in the social fabric of urban life in Lagos. Lagos is never as visible for us as when people target it for bombardment, quote, civilization, or other things. This is when we get the most intense descriptions of Lagos. So I'm going to skip over a little bit of the tech stuff and maybe just get to what's happening. I see a question in the chat, I hope. Okay, so the connection is getting bad, so I think I have to move through this quickly. But what I want to show you is, so I can explain in 3 minutes what this is. So one of the things I've done is try to recover the historical network, the historical shoreline of Lagos from the 1850s. I use a variety of maps and other tools. I'll just skip through that. But basically the end result is that you can layer historical maps on top of or beneath contemporary Lagos, and whiz bang, wow, GIS technology, you can actually move through these maps, use something called a spyglass to layer and find old parts of Lagos. So for instance, underneath here, I pre-recorded this because it's hard to do it live with the network issues. I did this all over Lagos Island, let's say in 1891, and you can see the historical city beneath that. And that is what has allowed me to trace the old shoreline of the city. So you can see where Balogun Square was historically, other places. So, okay, I think I've been kicked off. Okay, but the point of this is ultimately it gets me to be able to trace out the historical shoreline of the entire city. The second thing I'll show you very quickly is that I started a project on the tramway of Lagos. Now, even though this started as a project thinking about the history of the tram, which is, as anyone who's been in Lagos, it's so difficult to get around, traffic, go slow, all of that. And people are always looking for new alternatives. One of the things we don't know is that we had an alternative in the early 20th century that was constructed and actually torn out. So I hope you can still hear me. But part of what I wanted to show you, and I can also go back in the Q&A, is that there was a French photographer who actually came to Lagos and took pictures of the tramway and actually took the tram into the interior parts of the city that we often don't have evidence of. And we have these incredible photographic evidence of people who lived in Lagos at the time, moving through the center of the city, not just the marina area. So I'll just show you a little preview of the kind of work I do to situate these historical spaces on the contemporary map of Lagos so that at least you can see what these stops were, where they went. And if there's time, maybe in the Q&A, I can walk you through the story map that actually shows you the historical documents we have, the newspapers, the timetables, people's experiences, even accidents and other things that people experienced on the tramway. I've been told that the network is not going well, so I'm going to stop very soon. But what I wanted to say to end with, in conclusion, is the idea of why this kind of digital work can be important, right? Because unlike articles and books, digital projects die. Our URLs can break, domain names can expire, files and formats can become outdated, leading to disruptions in accessing these projects. So maintaining long-term access to these digital projects, it requires careful planning. And the first challenge is, of course, sustaining interest and funding in the topics that matter. We've talked, I will skip past a little bit of this because I got that notification. But what I want to say is that the shift to social media, especially with interested parties outside of the academy, was almost inevitable for this kind of work. And as we can see on this panel, as I think we'll see, that local stakeholders and people from these places can now decide what history should be told publicly with which hashtags and on which platforms. So I think that this means that the future of digital history for cities like Lagos in this region it will be more democratic and more interdisciplinary. And the near future is likely to be more collaborative, but not in the sense of privileging only academia, but more in terms of partnership. I look forward to your questions and thank you. And I can't hear you.
Okay, now you can hear me. Okay, yes. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. I think we mostly understood your presentation. Unfortunately, there were some interruptions because of the network. But I mean, I really encourage you to go to the website. It's really fascinating and, really well done for all the work. And also, I'm also looking forward to read the article that you mentioned. Now we can go to our second panelist. So Etim.
Start the video. Can you hear me though?
Etim, you're still muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Good morning.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. I'm unable to start my video for some reason. I think maybe the video's kind of off.
Yes, we can hear you, and we decided to stop the videos so that we can at least hear you clearly.
Okay. All right. I will just go ahead and share my screen, and then here we are. Okay. So I'm very quickly. I'm here to talk about the Nigerian Nostalgia Project, and let me see, what do we have here? So, and hopefully, I think it's running on its own. Okay, it's running on its own. Okay, it's running on its own. So I'll just take it this way. So the Nigerian Nostalgia Project, very quickly, is a popular culture, identity-focused project that collects what we do is we collect, preserve, we reformat, and we distribute elements of history and culture. History, culture, values, identity, and the experience of the Nigerian collective. The project aggregates the digital images, documents, sound bites, and video footage from a plurality of sources. We get it from, public and private sources, and we use these to create records and to share information that hopefully enables Nigerians to go through a process of self-examination and a reconnection to Nigeria's, what we call Nigeria's foundational ideals. The projects, on a daily basis, we support research, analysis, writing, and ultimately documenting of Nigerian histories, identity, culture for education, entertainment, commercial, public uses, general public access to such information, which is, what we're focused on. So going through this, that's us in a nutshell. I'm just going to talk about social media and how we use social media and how it has provided positive results for us. At the core of NNP's public-facing activities is the ability to bring ordinary people, academic and lay, if you wish, to make a distinction, together to interact over the details of our subject focus that have been defined into 4 categories. That is Nigerian history, Nigerian culture, Nigerian experience, and Nigerian identity. So what we provide is that we use social media platforms, as you can see from this diagram here, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter are the main ones. And and through those platforms, we engage audiences by using photographs, vintage photography, and stories to I guess to evoke emotion and also to engage them over the histories and the information. So as such, we use social media as a channel through which to help people learn a little bit more about themselves, because we found that a lot of Nigerians have not necessarily learned any of this information through the formal education process. So just to give you an example, here is a photograph which somebody has posted, and it says here, this is Chief Olamide Ajayi, the Atoye of Ado-Ekiti. His mother was from Ekiti, while his father was the great High Chief Ajayi Bembe, the 8th Obanikoro of Lagos. Source, he says his source is from personal collection, and the photograph is from January 1st, 1939, and it's posted by his grandson. And these are the kinds of images that are typically shared on our platforms by our participants and members. I'll just go through. We have other things like documents. Here's a document from 1974 about the Adebikoya movement. It's a little bit of information. We have. It's a document from Agence France Presse, and it has a little bit of extra information there by the poster, and that actually just transmits, one piece of information which I personally didn't know, and I think that a lot of people, a lot of Nigerians or younger Nigerians wouldn't have come across that information in their own experience. So essentially, on these platforms, we build communities of people bound by a set of core values and rules of behavior, attracting them and engaging them using a combination of vintage photography and historical facts to evoke the very positive emotions of nostalgia. This is important considering the counterforce of divisive negativity, I suppose, that can be equally as potent from the events reported in the so-called real world. So nostalgia may be a critical element in a country like ours from the perspective of its diversity, and we can benefit as it helps people people from different backgrounds find positive spaces and common ground to stand on, and perhaps over time they each gain interest about each other's backgrounds and each other's cultures and each other's differences. and begin to show respect for those. Overall, social media means reaching large numbers of people for us in a relatively short space of time at a relatively minimal cost. Our social media activities revolve around participants sharing these photographs and videos and documents. You know, in the beginning, it was very difficult to get people to share their personal photographs, but now we can't get rid of people. We can't stop them from doing. Everybody comes in and says, you know, why aren't my family photographs up here? And we just say you didn't post them. So these that I'm showing right now are just examples of the kinds of photographs that you will find within the project. And a lot of our activity is actually on Facebook. We have, you know, over 100,000 people on there who are all very actively discussing and actively, you know, tearing apart every bit of information and every detail that is, you know, posted by one person. So there's a lot of, sometimes there are contentions, but, you know, we have very good moderators who are able to manage the discussion process so that things don't fall apart and things don't, you know, spiral downwards. And we've done this for quite a long time and we've been very successful at it. Yeah, and for instance, this example here is, you know, is the photograph of the Oloi of Ezomo Omorui. Ezomo Omorui is a Benin chief from 1950. It's posted by the great grandson of the chief, who is pictured here in the inset. And these are all his wives. And you can see this already provokes a discussion about hair, because these are very, very unusual hairstyles, etc. Going on from there, within the discussions that ensue, various participants add into the mix various pieces of information that even the poster of the photo may not be aware of, demonstrate how one photograph, which is personal property, can quickly become community or national property as various people establish through the commentary genuine connections to it. So with each bit of information sometimes follows a deep sense of pride, confidence that can be a motivating factor in the pursuit of personal excellence, which are some of the things that we're trying to achieve. Here in this photograph, we're just trying to demonstrate, you know, the kind of cohesion that occurs. Here are people who have met online. The lady you see on the right her name is Lucy Chima. She's an Igbo lady, and she went to Kaduna to visit this man, who is also a member of NNP and his family in Kaduna. And this message that she posted with it, he said, "He will always maintain his place in my heart. I came to Kaduna yesterday to see my sister and her family. And of course, I will always get in touch with my big brother, Lawal Jibrin, whether we are able to see or not. As usual, he was willing to come over, but I insisted it was my turn to visit, and my nephew drove me to his beautiful home. There, my nephew and I were warmly received by his family and his adorable grandson. I would love to add that I've always had a brother in LJ. I would also love to add that our friendship was birthed on Facebook, NNP for short, which is the Nigerian Nostalgia Project, and watered by the love for our fellow men and for our love for the unity of Nigeria, Lucy Chima. And we have a special place online where interactions between members, you know, you can post photographs, you know, members have dinners, we have NNP gatherings, which are organized they're member-led and they're organized. So people are usually meeting for the first time because they've had a discussion online about these photographs. And so there's a lot of cohesion is what the point I'm trying to make here is that there's cohesion that comes out of these interactions over these photographs, over these discussions, over these histories, over these, and the information that we share. via social media. And so somebody like Mutiat, who's an Igbo lady, would not have gone perhaps all the way to Kaduna and visited somebody in the north, or that's what they make you think in the Nigeria of today. But you know, what we're doing is that we're experiencing the fact that people are coming together in spite of the differences in their backgrounds. Okay, so essentially what social media enables us to do is provide learning, community, confidence, inclusion, pride, cohesion, respect for diversity, and the list goes on. These are just some of those benefits. And just to go over quickly, this is the front end of what NMP is. Now we're going to go to the back end of it, because there's also a lot of things that are going on in the back. So here I'm going to talk about preservation of the NMP experience and the limits of social media. So the first thing, the danger of social media, of course, is that a lot of social media is a generational trend. We only need to look at things like MySpace, Friendster, Alta Vista, Vine, are some of these social media sites that have disappeared in the last 10 or 15 years. So we as Nostalgia Project, if we're going to continue doing what we're doing, and we're going to continue being relevant to successive generations of Nigerians, it's very important for us to be able to understand what the trends are within the social media space, and also to adapt. But adapting means that we have to begin to do things like data control. We've got to be able to control our data. So 10 years from now, if Facebook didn't exist anymore, what would happen to us, or where would all our data be, and where would all our information, where would we put our information? So it's very important that these are some of the things that we think about on a very regular basis, and we're taking actions in that regard. So data control, so what we do is we collect, synthesize, categorize, reformat, and distribute the data that we have. And of course, some of this looks like backward integration. It looks like we're going to a more traditional model as opposed to the social media model, but this is what is necessary to preserve things for the long term, while we continue to follow social media trends. So, for example, some of the stuff that you see on Instagram is synthesized information. So from a post on Facebook, what we will do is we will go through all the commentary, we go through the captions, we look at the photographs, and we will develop stories from these. And this is what we call synthesized information. So we'll come up with these stories, which we then post to Instagram, and which we reformat in different ways to create video, short documentaries, etc., and that sort of thing. So, yeah, and so our output really, the target of our output is really going to, in the long run, is supposed to be, all kinds of documentaries, full-length documentaries, micro-documentaries, full-length fiction, short film, and even 60-second influencer video. So our goal is to take all the information that we have and turn that into some kind of audiovisual format, so that it can be consumed into the future, because we think that that's the direction in which information is going to be consumed even now and in the future. So where was I? Okay, so here we're talking about reformatting. Post this, obviously doing video, I guess the point we're trying to make here is that doing video and reformatting in the video is obviously a costly and expensive experience. So what we've had to think about ways in which we're going to be able to keep on delivering free access to information and qualitative information using video, but being able to produce this video. So we do this right now through a number of programs. Our current program that we're running in 2021 is called the 12 Icons, where we have gone through a process of selecting 12 icons in 2021, and that information is on the website for anybody to see. And our selection process and selection criteria is all up there. But what the point I'm making here is that we are putting to, we are, for each of the 12 icons that we have selected, there's obviously the question of why we've selected them, what makes these people, because they're all controversial figures, of course, but why are they icons, and what values, what collective Nigerian values do they represent that makes them worthy to be considered icons. And so the videos that we're producing 12 videos that are going to accompany this program. And so those will be shared freely on the internet so that, people can interact with people can interact with those, with that material. And that hopefully broadens our own audiences, because one of the things that we're concerned about also is broadening our audiences, constantly broadening our audiences and reaching new people. To support this our production ability, what we have done is that we have embarked upon a strategy of defining of building relationships, first of all, with building networks of creatives, of academia, of technology, and of business. And then also coming up with solutions to propose the best business outcomes so that we can, acquire the funding to be able to, support to support the relationship between, between the creatives, the academics, and the technology, the technology third parties who we bring together in this into this with this strategy. I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm trying to get through as quickly as possible. And then we get to distribution. We've created a platform online, which is a video streaming platform, which is supposed to be a repository of all the material that we have, and from where we distribute, we promote on social media. So we will still use social media, but all these things essentially help us to capture our documentation, with the documentation that we have now, and continue to make it freely accessible to the public. And engage them that way. And basically that's it. And I hope I haven't gone too long.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation. Shola.
Good morning. Everybody here. Good morning. My name is Olusola Kuti, Olakunle Olusola. Alpha Nigeria. I'm presenting our project. I don't know if I'll be talking about the Alpha project. The Alpha is Alpha Nigeria. So let me just go on so you'll catch up. The Alpha project started in 2006, 2007, basically as a publication. We wanted to have a publication that was targeted to the youth market, young Nigerians who possibly knew nothing about history or knew very little about history. Now, I'm a trained graphic designer, so we wanted to do something that was visual. So rather than have a lot of text, we wanted to be able to add graphics in there, add color, add things that will attract young people to actually read all these articles, to read the stories. And obviously we knew that by doing that as well, we need to reduce the text. So shorter paragraphs, sometimes catchwords, hashtags, slang if necessary. And it's sort of helped to attract them. If we go to the slide. So the Alpha is the publication, it's conceptualized as a timeline booklet, which means we will start from the 60s, go to the 70s per decade, and then we cover little things that happened across the way and obviously highlight that. Next slide. So this was the first feature in the 2007 publication. And that was, I think that was in 2007. So yeah, we were almost 50 then. So if you check from the text, it's a bit more, how should I say, more, not funky, but it's a bit more cut out for today's market, basically, as in a lot of slang in there. So we said things like the green bits represent agriculture, the white bit signifies University of Peace. What we noticed is that by talking and writing like this, young people can also share this information because it's easy to copy, it's easy to share. But at the same time, they are learning. The next slide, please. So the second thing we started doing was taking pictures. So we will stage pictures, as in stage decades. So with this particular one, we got somebody to pose with a Vespa because we were talking about the 60s. So rather than use only pictures that were from the 60s, we started staging some of the pictures ourselves, get photographers, direct the shoots, and actually present the image. And then beside it, where necessary, we put in text or something that is related to that decade. This was another slide, another part of the publication in 2007, in 1974, where we were saying, okay, now Nigeria found crude oil. So obviously we forgot about agriculture. And if you say the last part there, it says we forgot about the green bits in our flag. Things that they will find interesting to read, but at the same time, we're conveying that message through as well. Next slide. So though it was in 2007, we stopped in 2012 for a while. We had a website, we had published a number of publications, but we noticed that we had to come back because a lot of young people knew virtually nothing, very little about things that happened in Nigeria, because obviously they don't teach history in schools anymore. So there was the need to actually come back. And that's when we decided that, okay, we will go through the same channels, but at least try and be consistent this time. Obviously, budget was an issue, but we're riding on. So this is the history of Nigeria's oil. But like I'm saying, we use graphics. So rather than have text and talk about 1954 and 1956 and the 60s, the Biafra dilemma and all that, we put it into graphics. And all of this are available to download on the website as well. By doing this, obviously, they can share the information, they can download, they can save, they can print. It's free. We told them, I think somebody was even trying to put it on a t-shirt. No problem. As long as the information gets out there, we're happy. I just zoomed into that a bit, but obviously it's on the website if you want to download it. Now, the recent publication, we also cover, I think this is the 60s as well, yes. So in the How Far print, what we now decided to do was add scan codes where we're talking about a video that's currently on YouTube, but it's in our magazine. So a young person can actually scan it from his phone and he goes to YouTube and he watches that video. So it's that interactive. And then there's a version of the magazine that's also on the website, which is interactive. So if you're reading the magazine on the website, that video will actually play from YouTube because it's embedded. So that way we're not saying, oh, this happened in 1968. We're showing them video clips of 1966, 1969, where it happened, what happened after the event. And it becomes a bit more, it's easier to touch as it becomes real because they can actually see it live. So we now decided to recently start using known faces because we noticed that when we did our photography shoots, although the young people liked it and our readers liked it, some people flipped through the pages. So we now obviously contacted a lot of celebrities, a lot of known faces, and said, would you like to be in our photography shoots? So what we do is we get celebrities, we get people who are ready to contribute their faces and their time, and we conduct the whole shoot, and then we now date that picture. So this was done in about 9 years ago, but we now date it to 1960 something. So if in the previous slide, we were talking about the violence in the North and when there were killings. So in this slide, in the magazine, we're actually depicting when people were returning home. This way, you get people who are like, oh, I can see Mo Cheddar, I can see Drogba, I can see Temi Gomez, which they already know. These are Twitter influencers. Some of them have 10,000 followers, some of them have more. But you can see these faces and then possibly read more or get attracted to read more about the story. We also shot this. This was obviously the Civil War. We used Jesse Jags, MI, Ice Prince, and Brimo. So still, it was also shot, I think, 10 years ago. And basically, we're talking about that period in time. But people would have flipped through and wouldn't even care or might not even be interested in what happened. But by the time we're using people that they follow, people that they know, oh, I like his music, I like her music, there's a possibility that they might be attracted to that content and read more about it, and we convey our messages. So we have a fully functional website. On the website as well, the magazine is there, an interactive version. There are downloads on howfarnigeria.com. And then we have our Instagram and our Twitter page. The Instagram page, we went serious and heavy on it in February this year because it was sort of taking a nap as well for a long time. So next slide. What we do is we sort of try and connect the dots. So we see a picture from 1932 talking about the leprosy, the leprosy center in Akwa Ibom. And then we know that Ikoli White actually was in that hospital as well around that time. So when we saw this picture and the date on the picture, we realized that maybe at the end of the day, these 4 guys were some of the people that actually treated Ikoli White. But then when we push this information out there as well, you get young people or you get people who are like, who is Ikoli White? Now, J. Clef, which is the choral group, actually sings some of his songs. It's a full choir. And they rehearse and they actually have a page where they have a lot of Ikoli White songs. So rather than talk about, oh, there's this choir group that sing his songs, we'll link to the video on YouTube. So that way you see the story, you hear the song, then there's a little bit of a 360 because then you can appreciate the story more. Next slide. This was Tinubu Square in 1954. So what we do is we look for old pictures as well. We talk about them and then we show you how it looks today. on the same slide. So at the end of the day, you get people who are like, oh, maybe, oh, this is what Tinubu look like. What's missing now? As in, if you check the building in the center, that is the Ilojo Bar. It was demolished recently, a few years ago. So if you compare the two pictures, you see that the Ilojo Bar is missing in that picture. So what we do is we push out these images and we hope that once the discussions start going on, people actually go back and say, oh, what was the Ilojo Bar about? Why was it demolished? What is standard? They compare, and then the discussions can happen on their own. Because of our target market as well, we know it can't be history all the time, because eventually they get bored and they leave. So we also push a lot of other pictures. These are from the 80s, sometimes the 70s, just so that the page is also interactive. The page is a bit fun. So people always have a breather as well. They have things they can share. So you might be surprised that it might have maybe 418 likes, but in the background on DMs, they might have shared it like 2,000 times, which means it's going to WhatsApp groups, it's going to other websites, it's going to phones, it's going to other social media as well. So why, how far? We noticed that in our history, we have a lot of people who are celebrated as heroes. As we call them the heroes of this, they made this happen. But then we always try and push this message that these were ordinary women and men who had heroic moments. So rather than push that they're heroes, we rather say they had heroic moments. And then we discuss some of the times when other things might have happened, sometimes things that happened during that time that we can still see traces of today. So these are two posts from our Instagram page, obviously about the Western Union crisis and like the beginning when it was about to start. One is in 1962, both are in 1962, as in the players and all that. So people can actually read. Since we have these newspapers and we've sort of collated all these papers, what we do is once in a while, we scan the papers exactly as they are, and we put it online for people to read. So rather than transcribe all the text, we want them to read it on that actual paper because the authenticity is now 100%. They see how the paper looked. More pictures. So what we do, this is Muna and Maya Tafu. Tafu is a fashion designer. I don't know if anybody knows him. So if you see on top of the TV there's the Up Owl record as well. So what we're doing is obviously shooting this thing, staging this photo shoots, but embedding the history there as well, so that there's a discussion that continues. The Asaba Massacre, players that may have known about the massacre, things that obviously people try and hide or people try not to discuss. So the information is out there, but you notice that a lot of young people don't know because it is not in a platform that they will readily accept, readily want to be attracted to. So obviously we go hot, but at times we dilute it a bit. That's another shoot with Clarence Peters and Kemi Adetiba, obviously talking about protests that happened around the 80s. Next slide. So at times we go a bit more into detail, and this is General Murtala Mohammeds Car. So we have the Dimka Confession book, and in the Dimka Confession book, it talks about the emptied magazines on the car. So if in the confession book, they say they emptied magazines on the car, and then we go to the National Museum, we want to see the bullet holes. It's a bit of what sometimes we do and we enjoy doing. So we were able to go around the car and mark where all the bullet holes the visible bullet holes on the Mohammeds Car is at the Onikon Museum. Next slide. We're live. Yes, we're live. So some data as well, some more newspaper clippings talking about when the vigilante phenomenon started. First time people started burning robbers, killing robbers, mob action. Because then you look at it and you're like, some people will say today that, oh, why did this happen? As in, when did this start? As in, oh, this has been happening, as in, the police is not doing anything. And we want to show that, oh, in the 70s, in the 80s, this also happened. This reporter carried this story. It was discussed, and solutions were also discussed. But if those solutions were taken, that's another story. We obviously, with graphics, also try and push certain messages. So things like Revolution, artists who have sang different songs that have trended, songs that have made, songs that people use in protests as well. So we discuss all that as well in the same magazine or online. Okay, I added this because I just picked this up. And this was when France spends 1.5 million on Nigerians. And this was happening every year so we want to, since all these things are there, since we have data, we have newspaper clippings, we want to find out, oh, if this happened, what were the results? Where did the monies go to? Where is the documented evidence that the monies were used for what they were intended? So going through the mag, you will notice that we also discuss things like the Udoji's salary, when Wole Soyinka released the record, criticizing the Shagari government. Next slide. Stuff about the ballot papers in 1982, because we look at the ballot papers now and we're like, oh, there's no space for thumb printing. But in 1982, no matter how big your thumb was, it will fit into that ballot box. So we want to bring this out so that discussions that can happen as well. Stuff about NYSC. We used WizKid, Banky W, skills in this shoot, just to get the ongoing discussion, as in get a discussion going. And then I can actually end with this one. This was in 1956, where the ministers were trying to spend 300,000 pounds on new residences. This is 2012, where the presidency was trying to spend 2.8 billion on residential buildings. So we like doing this as well, because it shows you that it didn't start now. It's always been there. Next slide. And then obviously protests. So that's a protest in 1971. That was a cartoon clip in 1978. That was dedicated to students who lost their lives in 1978. Next slide. And then obviously link it to the NSAS that happened last year. There's a video of this, but I don't think we need to watch it because I think I've run out of time. So that's the Halfa project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ola, and thank you to all the presenters. Obviously, I have a lot of questions, but we're going to start by opening the floor to you if you have any question.
Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters. I really enjoy your presentation. I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk to Ademide again, for her to explain to us again her methodology with maps. I think we misheard what she said. So we're able to get her through, please. Ademide, please, please. So interesting in your methodology again, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. My question goes to the first presenter. Now, talking about the pre-colonial Lagos map, because I'm particularly interested in that. And I would like to know if the presenter actually take cognizance of the migration pattern of the early settlers of Lagos, because just of recent there have been arguments between two schools of thought in regards to who are the early settlers of Lagos, between the Aworis and the Benin. You know, this argument has been in vogue. Now, I think if you captured the migration pattern, this perhaps may also help to lay to rest the argument concerning who are the early settlers of Lagos. So I would like to know if you actually take cognizance of that migration pattern.
Do you want me to answer, or are we getting more questions?
I think I will ask another question before. So thank you very much to the three of you for this presentation. I have actually a question for the three of you. I would like you to develop a little bit on the backstage of this project. So, for example, how many people are beyond this project? Do you have found for the projects? Because I mean, the three projects are absolutely fascinating, and I mean, I think it's quite time consuming as well. So I was wondering, how do you manage? What's beyond what you are? All these three projects. Can you develop a little bit? And namely for the second speaker, Etim, I was wondering, are you able to collect all these pictures quite regularly? I mean, on a daily basis. And for Mr. Kuti, how do you select your episodes? So the episodes of the history you want to talk about, how do you operate the selection? And for Ademide, I'm sorry, I would like you to develop a little bit on the archives. Maybe you mentioned them, but there was we couldn't listen a little for some minutes of the presentation. So could you develop on your archives? And do you think in terms of archives, it could be possible to do this project in other cities of Nigeria? Thank you very much.
So the future of, that was the question, as in the future. Basically, there's another website we're building, which is iknowhowfar.com. We want to blow up into a digital archive, which means all the books, all the newspapers, all the pictures, want it to be accessible. But then we know that it's easier when it's online. So a digital archive is obviously the way to go. But then in Nigeria, it's very complicated because everybody is competing rather than collaborating. So everybody wants to set up a digital archive. As in, I might have one, somebody else wants. If there was a way we could all sort of, on some platforms, actually collaborate, then we know we have more material, because not everybody has the same thing. But if it's possible to actually collaborate, then we have more to showcase. In terms of how we survive, it's basically via the publication. Because we noticed that that's why we had to stop in 2012. So the publication is sold both online, it's on Amazon, and then obviously the funds we raise from that is how, because there are no adverts on How Far. As in, we've not been able to get any sponsorship or adverts placed. And we actually have people who say they don't want adverts in the publication because it sort of disrupts the whole thing when MTN is talking about something and then you're trying to talk about something serious on the next page. So, but we're open to it. But for now, nothing is happening.
Ademide, if you want to start. and then Etim.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I know that there are parts you didn't hear. So it's not clear which part of the methodology that you heard, but one thing I can say very clearly, actually, maybe I can just show you super quick, is if I were to go back to this idea of, what was the original shoreline of Lagos, I don't know if this slide even showed at all, but part of what you can do with the ArcGIS, historical GIS, and the other Esri material is I've actually been able to trace out on the contemporary map of Lagos what the old shoreline of the city used to look like, the lagoons, the inlets, the creeks, all those things where McGregor Canal was cut, where the swamps were, all of those things. So if you're able to look at this map in more detail, this is the kind of thing you can see. And I think probably part of this part with the spyglass, I hope this was able to show. So because of the new tools in ArcGIS, you can do a lot of georeferencing and comparing maps. So this is actually a live demo. So you can actually move this spyglass around, but I pre-recorded because of issues like happened today. So you can do this. This is how I trace the whole of Lagos Island in that sense. I'll stop sharing, but it's hard to sort of describe the methodology for that. Just, it's Illustrator, timelines, ArcGIS, things like that. The question of archives and funding, I guess funding is always an issue, as mentioned by the previous panelist. And there's also whoever funds you gets to sort of make certain decisions as well. So as an academic, I do have certain kinds of funding that can push projects. I do have partners I work with in Lagos, but we're very small. It's not even, I wouldn't even say it's a team. It's a few of us that do this work. And so with more funding, more is possible. So I'm also myself looking for more funding. But of course, because I'm at an academic institution, my time is sort of taken up by particular things, teaching, research, writing, my book projects, things like that. So this is kind of, I would like it to be more prominent in my own research, but it's kind of secondary, unfortunately, still, until I'm able to secure the funding that I need. And to go back to the question of archives, I think it's really interesting to see the kinds of photographs that my co-panelists are using and how these things start to circulate and how people have these discussions. I spent a lot of time in different archives in the UK, in the US, in Nigeria even. We have all these archives all over Nigeria. People have photographs, maps, all kinds of things. So the question of access is really important, and also Ibadan, where you are. So the question of access is really important. Archives in Nigeria are endangered. And yes, you can do this kind of work probably for anywhere in Nigeria, because I started, like I've said, started combining archival research, typical archival research, with actually being in Lagos. And I think one of the earlier questions, I'm just trying to answer all the questions, debates on Lagos will never be settled. This sort of keeps us in business, right? Who came first, where, when, the Benin legacy, all of those things. I don't think that we will ever have a consensus. There's conflicting evidence. People have different claims. There's different reasons. So I think that the debates will continue. I don't think a map or two is going to actually solve that debate, but at least it can offer perspectives and more evidence. I hope you could hear me.
Yes, we heard you very clearly this time. Thank you, Etim.
Yes, I think I got the question about the question about do we collect on a daily basis? Yes, and what's the future for these projects? So I'll try and answer those two questions together. Yes, we do. We've collected the photographs on a daily basis for the last 10 years. And so I don't even know how. I think we certainly have more than 100,000 photographs. Now, these photographs don't belong to us. We don't claim, they belong to the people or the original owners. Some of them do belong to us because we've purchased or bought or whatever, acquired them in some way, form, or fashion. Or in some cases, some people have left entire collections to us. And so we're grateful for all of those. But that's not what we see as our asset. And I'm saying this so that we can transition into the question about what are the next stages for us. We see what we have. Our assets are really the stories that we have and the stories that we're able to create. And we're actually focused on stories that are short and can be delivered quickly. Some people will say they're anecdotal, yes, in a way, but they are fact-based. And so, and I think this is the way that people are going to consume information in the future. So we have been concentrating our efforts on perfecting what is the the best short video or the best short story to tell, to deliver one piece of history or couple of facts about historical facts within an interesting and consumable, in some kind of consumable format going forward. And I think that's, and that's where we are. And how, and then to talk about the question of funding, which is also a very, it's a very important issue. It's so for us, the question is, how do we get the folks who have the money, i.e. business and corporations and institutions, etc., to support that. And so we have to create stories that relate to perhaps their products. When I say products, not directly. So for example, if you have a shipping company, for example, we may tell a story of shipping, from ancient Nigeria or something of that nature, or what the shipping routes were, and that may be something that they may be able to sponsor, and we are able to deliver value to our audience at the same time. So we try to create these win-win situations where it means that some stories are going to be left untold. Well, yes, initially, but I think that over time, you will see the volume increase, and as people become more responsive to these kinds of things, you'll see a bigger play by creatives, by institutions, by academics, and technology as well. So those 4 areas are areas which we are concentrating. We are trying to build networks so that we're able to deliver a great product to the public for free, which is what they enjoy getting right now. And I hope that answers the question. As far as information, I think as far as information, what we're trying to do is we're trying to be aggregators of information. I think it was the first panelist who mentioned something about collaborations and how people ought to collaborate. And yes, we absolutely agree with that. What we are trying to do is that we are trying to be aggregators, and we're trying to create things like a search engine where you can search Nigerian information, and all that information doesn't have to belong to us. It may belong to various institutions around the world. It may belong to even to University of Ibadan, for example, would be a great example. The idea is that we should be able to port information from all these places so that we can still maintain that position of being able to deliver free access to the public and to as broad a public as possible. That's our goal. And there's one more thing I wanted to say, was that yes, and so and the way that we've decided to do that essentially is built around stories. So our search engines are not going to be search engines like a Google or a Yahoo or whatever is out there right now, but it's really going to be, in other words, you can research, we will take our short stories and we will present these, and then they will have links to the different photographs, different resources, in different places. There are so many repositories of Nigerian information across the entire globe, and we want to be able, and our goal is to continually add and include and connect with those sources so that we can deliver this valuable information to Nigerians and non-Nigerians for that matter. So, I hope that answers.
Yes, thank you very much. I have another question that was asked in the chat, so it's directed to Shola and Etim. How can you please explain quickly how you curate the information that you publish, and
Okay.
the themes that you select for a period of time? How do you select them, and are they prompted by current issues happening in the country? There was also another question here. We still have a few minutes, so.
Okay.
A question goes to the second presenter concerning the authenticity and reliability of the pictures we are getting from the people. As also something just happened recently, that was last year in this country, situation whereby people are extracting pictures online and also from libraries, post tagging them with big stories, claiming that maybe this so woman that first start cooking rice in Nigeria and all these kind of things. How do you tend to cope with all this kind of picture?
Okay.
Thank you. So if there's no other question, actually, I also had one question, maybe also directed to the three of you, but mostly to Shola and Etim, about the copyright. And I mean, I can see that on how far you always have a filter on the pictures. So I'd like for you to explain why and if you have had some, issues as, you're using this material. So I don't know, Shola, if you want to start.
Okay. How do we select the pictures and what do we feature? Sometimes we follow trends. We use Twitter a lot to see what's trending, what people are discussing. There was a time when during the end protest, we had lots of young people saying, "Oh, my generation did what the previous generation couldn't do," as in we did what our parents couldn't do, as in we stood up for our rights and all that. And we're like, no, that's not accurate. It's always happened. Nigerians have always protested. But now, obviously, you can document it. So what we do is when that information goes out there, or when we have a lot of people discussing things that might not be factual, we look through our archives and we bring out facts, things that happened before, things that maybe address those issues, or things that clarify those issues, so that at least that discussion is a bit more stable, is a bit more balanced, because they have something they can look at, they have something they can reference, because this do not exist. In terms of copyright, we noticed that because we are online, a lot of people just do copy and paste. So what happens is you put up something and before you know it, it's flying all over the place. So with our own pictures, the pictures that we have, the pictures that have been contributed by families, by people, contributors, we actually put that filter over it so that at least we know when it goes out. I'm a graphic designer, like I said, so I've worked on the Photographer's Odyssey. I worked on Sandbag City, 2 books about Lagos. Worked on some other coffee table books. And with Gillian, if I can quote her, Gillian Hopwood shot Nigeria and Lagos in 1954. She has pictures from the 50s to the 60s, 70s, and a lot of her pictures are flying all over the internet with no credits. And she was like, all she wants is a credit picture by this person. So that's some of the problem. We're happy that on social media, on Instagram now insists that you put a credit. So when you put a picture, they're like, credit the source. So as long as platforms keep doing that, and more people are actually doing that, where you can't just post, as in you have to see where you got the source, I think it's a good step in the right direction.
Okay.
Thank you. Etim?
Yes. So to the first question about how do we curate? We have rules, and we have moderators and administrators, about 50 of them, who monitor our, particularly our Facebook group, which is with the source, which is where our collection point online. And there are about 50 administrators who are, who cover 20, who make sure that there's coverage 24/7. So whenever a photograph is posted, we have rules that you must include source information. So, and if there's no source information, the photograph is either deleted or it's never approved to enter in. So we will send you a note saying you need to provide source information, description, and all kinds of some other bits of information before we can put this into the group. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we, with information or with discussion and information that is provided, the great thing about social media is that, especially when you have an active group like we have on Facebook, where there are some very vocal people who, we have both academics and lay people, but people are very passionate about the history. So if you put anything that is remotely false, 15 minutes later, it will be ripped to shreds, with evidence or counterfacts. And initially, in the beginning, about 10 years ago, it was very different. That was a problem for the administrators, because of course, it was where there's history involved, there's emotion involved, and things spiral out of control very, very quickly. So we had to really, rein in some bad behavior in the beginning. But we found that over time, this has reduced. So right now, if you posted something which was not true, because I don't have all the information, I don't know everything. Of course, you post it, you tell me it is, the sky is blue, I'm going to have to accept that from you until somebody else comes along and says, okay, no, it's actually red, and here's the evidence why. So we try to promote a culture of a self-policing culture of facts and counterfacts. So in other words, you cannot react emotionally to a post if somebody says, this is what I believe, but you have to come with a counterfact, and those counterfacts will sit there until there is a higher piece of evidence, or maybe some concrete evidence that says, one or the other is true. So we think that there is some balance. There's a balancing mechanism which is inside of the culture that we have. So not all. Of course, if there is the simple rule, there's that simple rule of if 2 or 3 people said this is what happened, then you can say there is a school of thought. But then if somebody comes along with hard evidence that this is not what happened, then we have to move over to that. So this is the way that we kind of do, the filtering kind of occurs as far as curating information, which I think is what the question you were asking was. Somebody remind me of the second question, which I have forgotten now.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't know if you want to say a few words.
Well, I guess I can respond to sort of maybe the questions of how do you pick, right? How do you select what you're writing or what you do and put online? For me, I'm interested in a much older period, which makes my project quite different. So there's a lot of information circulating about the 20th century. There's a lot less information about the 19th century, as somebody framed the pre-colonial era in that sense. So part of what I'm really doing is really pushing back, and even eventually, hopefully, into the 18th century. So I'm much more interested in those older periods and thinking about those foundational stories for our city in that sense. I mean, Lagos in that sense. And also, I guess, I get most of my pictures from archives and other sources. So, and the question, I really liked the point about Gillian Hopwood's images floating around. A lot of what they've done for documenting Lagos, especially for architecture, is just floating around. And so this issue of copyright, who owns what, and just because somebody is in ownership of the sort of originals of some of these images that we use, just because an archive is in possession doesn't mean that they're actually the owner, right? They may own the rights, but that doesn't mean they're actually related in any way to the actual content. So I think this issue of copyright, who owns what and how to use it, is a really important one. And hopefully access will be more general and easier in the future, but also we'll be able to have more conversations. I was really struck by what Etim said about, emotion and history. I think what makes this interesting is people's reactions, right? So if we strip the emotion and we strip this kind of like debates, I wonder if people will find it worth it. Although I know what you're saying, we want it to be civil, right? We want it to be in a place that's generative rather than a place that's combative. But I think these pictures that you're showing are provocative, and it's the reaction that is really interesting.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our presenters. There's like a few words that I would like to say that I took from your presentations. The first one is how all of your projects are putting people and experiences first. And, you know, when we were talking about engaging the audience, I think that this is something that the three projects do really well. And also to engage the audience through emotions. And I think for that nostalgia that is present in your three projects, obviously in the Nigerian Nostalgia Project, it's even in the title, but I think the three projects are, you know, using this emotion also to talk about a world that existed that maybe is not there, or that we struggle to find traces of, but, you know, that still exists. And also how you use this, the past and the stories and this nostalgia to also discuss about the present and to push forward some conversations. I think also what the three of you said is the importance of collaboration, particularly when facing a limited amount of human and financial resources to run projects that are requiring multiple skills and also a lot of time that are very time consuming. So I hope this is, you know, only the beginning of this conversation and we can have other avenues for collaboration. So thanks again. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you for our colleagues in the US. I think now you can have a well-deserved rest, except if you want to stay with us through the night. So we're going to have a short break for around 15 minutes, and then we will be back for the next panel of the day. Thank you very much to everybody.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Just a quick announcement, like yesterday, people will bring to you the tea break and the small shop, so you can just stay seated. Thank you.
Starts to come alive until the day is dawning. You can throw out all the blues and hit the city lights, 'cause there's music in the air and lots of loving everywhere. So give me the night, give me the night. Give me the heat, action, a place to dine, a glass of wine, a little late romance. It's a chain reaction. We'll see the people of the world coming out to dance, 'cause there's music in the air and lots of loving everywhere. So give me the night, give me the night. So come on out tonight, and we'll leave the others on a ride to paradise. And if you feel alright, then we can be lovers, 'cause I see that starlight look in your eyes. And don't you know we can fly? Just give me the night, give me the night. Cause there's music in the air and lots of loving everywhere. So give me the night, give me the night. So come on out tonight, and we'll leave the others on a ride to don't you know we can fly? And if we stay together, we'll feel the rhythm of the evening taking us up high. Never mind the weather, we'll be dancing in the street until the morning light. Cause there's music in the air and lots of love everywhere. So give me the night. 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 Give me the night.
Y'avait pas d'image, y'avait pas de couleur, y'avait pas d'histoire, mon âme sœur. Y'avait pas les fêtes, mais y'avait pas le cœur, aucun sourire, mon âme sœur. Tu sais, le monde ne tournait pas rond, j'avais les mots, mais pas la chanson. Tu sais l'amour, tu sais la passion. C'est écrit, c'était dit, c'est la vie. Avant toi, je n'avais rien. Avant toi, on m'a pas montré le chemin. Je sais le ciel ne m'en veut pas d'avoir posé les yeux sur toi. Avant toi, on m'a pas montré le chemin.
Y'avait pas de maison, y'avait pas le bonheur, je n'avais pas de raison, mon âme, mon sœur. Y'avait pas de rire, mais y'avait pas de pleurs, j'étais seule ici.
Y'avait pas d'image, y'avait pas de couleur,
tu sais le monde
y'avait pas
tournait pas
d'histoire,
rond.
mon âme sœur.
J'avais les mots,
Y'avait
mais
pas
pas la chanson.
y'avait pas le cœur, aucun sourire, mon âme sœur. Tu sais, le monde ne tournait pas rond,
Mais c'était
j'avais les mots, mais pas la chanson. Mais c'est là, tu sais l'amour, tu sais la passion. Avant toi, je n'avais c'était écrit, c'était dit. Avant la vie, on m'a pas montré le chemin. Avant toi, je sais le ciel, je n'avais rien. D'avoir posé les yeux sur toi. On m'a pas montré le chemin. Je sais le ciel ne m'en veut pas d'avoir posé les yeux sur toi. Avant toi, on m'a pas montré le chemin. Avant toi, j'avais rien. Avant toi,
Y'avait pas de maison, y'avait pas le bonheur, j'avais pas de raison, mon âme, mon sœur. Je n'avais pas de rire, mais y'avait pas de pleurs, j'étais seule ici, mon âme, sœur. Tu sais le monde ne tournait pas rond, j'avais les mots, mais pas la chanson.
tu sais l'amour de toutes les façons.
On m'a pas montré le chemin.
Mais c'est écrit, c'était dit. Mais c'est la vie. Avant toi, je n'avais rien. Avant toi, on m'a pas montré le chemin. Je sais le ciel ne m'en veut
Enfant de ville
d'avoir posé
ou enfant
les
d'école,
yeux sur toi.
on se fait tous unis pour aller bien à l'horizon. Pas de boulot, c'est pas qu'on est con, non, c'est qu'on est trop. Alors on traque un peu de joie pour porter le sac quand ça va pas. Et demain on s'arrêtera. On dirait Georges, ça va de soi. Tout le monde, on ira faire la fête, on ira faire les rangs pour se vider la tête. On ira faire la fête, on ira faire les rangs pour se vider la tête. Non, pour oublier.
Je ne sais pas faire. J'ai beau mentir, tout me ramène à toi. Je ne sais pas faire quand t'es pas là.
Je veux sourire, parler de je n'ai plus de peine, plus rien à pleurer. Rien c'est déjà trop, tout me semble faux. Quand t'es pas là, ça ne compte pas. Quand t'es pas là, toi, là où les mots vont s'éveiller ça. Si tu l'entends, ça, je te pardonne. Quand t'es pas là, toi, là où les autres ont le cœur qui colle. Si tu le veux, prends, je te le donne. Je te le donne.
Enfant de ville ou enfant de foin, on se fait tous une île pour aller bien à l'horizon. Pas de boulot, c'est pas qu'on est con, non, c'est qu'on est trop. Alors on traque un peu de joie pour porter le sac quand ça va pas. Et demain l'horloge s'arrêtera. Comme dirait Georges, ça va de soi. Tout le monde, on ira faire la fête, on ira faire les rangs pour se vider la tête, tout oublier tu vois. On ira faire la fête, on ira faire les rangs pour se vider la tête. Non, pour oublier. Pour oublier. Pour oublier. On passe à pleurer sans mon sein dans nos valises. C'est du temps qui casse le dos, ça, qui nous le brise. Oublier l'horloge qui tourne et nous tue. Comme dirait Georges, bien entendu. Tout le monde, on ira faire la fête, on ira faire les rois pour se vider la tête, tout oublier tu vois. On ira faire la fête, on ira faire les rois pour se vider la tête. Pour oublier, pour oublier, pour oublier, pour oublier. Tout le monde fait ça. Il n'y a plus ni futur ni
ma douce souffrance, pourquoi s'acharner, tu recommences? Je ne suis qu'un être sans importance. Sans lui, je suis un peu paro. Je déambule seul dans le métro. Une dernière danse pour oublier ma peine immense. Je veux m'enfuir, que tout recommence. Oh, ma douce souffrance. Je remue le ciel, le jour, la nuit. Je danse avec le vent, la pluie. Un peu d'amour, un brin de miel. Et je danse, 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 danse. Je danse. Et dans le bruit, je cours et j'ai peur. Et sur mon tour vient la douleur. Dans tout Paris, je m'abandonne et je m'envole, vol, 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 que d'espérance. Sur ce chemin en ton absence, j'ai beau trimer, sans toi ma vie n'est qu'un décor qui brille vide de sens. Je remue le ciel, le jour, la nuit. Je danse avec le vent, la pluie. Un peu d'amour, un brin de miel. Et je danse, 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 danse. Je danse. Et dans le bruit, je cours et j'ai peur. Et c'est mon tour, vient la douleur. Dans tout Paris, je m'abandonne et je m'envole, vol, 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 vol. Dans ces douces souffrances dont j'ai payé toutes les offenses, écoute comme mon cœur est immense. Je suis une enfant du monde. Je remue le ciel, le jour, la nuit. Je danse avec le vent, la pluie. Un peu d'amour, un brin de miel. Et je danse, 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 danse. Je danse. Et dans le bruit, je cours et j'ai peur. Et sur mon tour revient la douleur. Dans tout Paris, je m'abandonne et je m'envole, vol, 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 vol.
Viens on s'aime, viens on s'aime. Ils pourront tout nous enlever, ils pourront bien essayer de nous monter l'un contre l'autre à contresens pour qu'on se vautre. Ils pourront nous raconter qu'on a eu tort, qu'on s'est trompé. Ils pourront pointer du doigt, pointer l'amour coupable de quoi. Viens on s'aime, viens on s'aime. Allez viens on s'aime, on s'en fout de l'amour, de la bienséance. Viens on s'aime, on s'en fout de leurs idées, de ce qu'ils pensent. Viens on s'aime et c'est tout, on fera attention dans une autre vie. Viens on s'aime, on est fou, encore un jour, encore une nuit. Oh, 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 oh. Du ciel, dire que notre histoire n'est pas belle, prier pour qu'on abandonne, qu'il y ait une nouvelle donne. Ils pourront bien nous avoir, le temps d'un doute, le temps d'un soir, mais après la peine et les cris sèchent les larmes qui font la pluie. Viens on s'aime, Alice, viens on s'aime.
نحبك نحبك أنا نحبك 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 Nice, c'est le moment de foutre le feu.
Dites-moi d'où il vient, enfin je saurai où je veux. Maman dit que lorsqu'on cherche bien, on finit toujours par trouver. Elle dit qu'il n'est jamais très loin, qu'il part très souvent travailler. Maman dit travailler c'est bien, bien mieux que mal accompagné. Pas vrai, où est ton papa? Dis-moi où est ton papa? Sans même devoir lui parler, c'est ce qui ne va pas. Ah sacré papa, dis-moi où es-tu caché? Ça doit faire au moins 1000 fois que j'ai compté mes doigts. Et où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es, où t'es, où papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es, où t'es, où papa, où t'es? Qu'on y croit ou pas, il y aura bien un jour on n'y croira plus. Un jour ou l'autre on sera tous papa et d'un jour à l'autre on aura disparu. Serons-nous détestables? Serons-nous admirables? Des géniteurs ou des génies? Dites-nous qui donne naissance aux irresponsables. Ah, dites-nous qui? Tiens, tout le monde sait comment on fait des bébés, mais personne sait comment on fait des papas. Monsieur, je sais tout, on aurait hérité, c'est ça, faut le sucer de son pouce ou quoi? Dites-nous, c'est caché, ça doit faire au moins 1000 fois qu'on a bouffé nos doigts. Et où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es, où t'es, où papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es, où t'es, où papa, où t'es? Où est ton papa? Dis-moi où est ton papa? Sans même devoir lui parler, il sait ce qui ne va pas. Hey, où est ton papa? Dis-moi où est ton papa? Sans même devoir lui parler, il sait ce qui ne va pas. Un sacré papa, dis-moi où es-tu caché? Ça doit faire au moins 1000 fois que j'ai compté mes doigts. Et où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es, où t'es, où papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es papa, où t'es? Où t'es, où t'es, où papa, où t'es?
Je ne sais pas faire, j'ai beau mentir, tout me ramène à toi. Je ne sais pas faire quand t'es pas là.
Je ne sais pas faire, J'ai beau sourire quand on parle de toi, je ne sais pas faire quand t'es pas là.
Je n'ai plus rien à perdre, rien à gagner.
Je n'ai plus de peine, plus rien à pleurer. Rien c'est déjà trop,
Tout me semble faux quand t'es pas là, ça ne compte pas. Quand t'es pas là, toi, là où les mots font s'aimer les âmes, si tu l'entends, ça, je te pardonne. Quand t'es pas là, toi, là où les autres ont le cœur qui colle, si tu le veux, prends, je te le donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne. J'ai le spleen de toi, de tes yeux. Sans un signe, plus rien de nous deux. Je reste digne même si ça fait mal quand t'es pas là.
je sens ta main posée sur le miel et le son de ta voix qui traîne. Je n'ai plus le goût de rien quand t'es pas là.
Je n'ai plus rien à perdre, rien à gagner.
Et je n'ai plus de peine, plus rien à pleurer. Rien c'est déjà trop,
Tout me semble faux quand t'es pas là, ça ne compte pas. Quand t'es pas là, toi, là où les mots font s'aimer les âmes, si tu l'entends, ça, je te pardonne. Quand t'es pas là, toi, là où les autres ont le cœur qui colle, si tu le veux, prends, je te le donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne. Je ne sais pas faire quand t'es pas là.
je ne sais pas faire. J'ai beau sourire quand on parle de toi.
Quand t'es pas là, toi, là où les mots font s'aimer les âmes, si tu l'entends, ça, je te pardonne. Quand t'es pas là, toi, là où les autres ont le cœur qui colle, si tu le veux, prends, je te le donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne. Ça fait je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne, donne, donne. Je te le donne. Seul dans mon monde, 4 heures du mat, loin des flashs. 207 chambres d'hôtel. Je t'appelle mais tu décroches pas. Seul sur la route.
Good morning, everyone. You are welcome to this session of the conference, and I welcome you all once again. I'll be the moderator for this session. My name is Mutiat Oladejo from the Department of History, University. For this panel, I'll just go straight away to introduce the presenters. And okay, for this panel, we are supposed to start by 10:30 to 12:15, but I suppose we are 15 minutes behind. And so we just start straight away. We have Dr. Adeduntan. Dr. Adeduntan. You're welcome. Dr. Kudus Adebayo and Dr. Senayon Olaoluwa. You're welcome. And I guess the third presenter is just coming up without calling his name, Dr. Babajide Ololajulo. You're welcome. Yeah. And so, I don't know, if 15, 20, 25 minutes, which one will be fine? 15 minutes, 20 minutes, okay. So we'll be allotting 20 minutes to each presenter, and I'll just try and give a brief introduction into their presentation. Yeah, Dr. Adeduntan will start first, and is going to be discussing digitizing an African studies audiovisual archive, moves, falter, and lessons. And so just a brief introduction on its abstract. The need to retool production and dissemination of knowledge in and of Africa is foundational to the emergence of the discipline of African studies on the continent. So that's a kind of introduction to his abstract. We love to listen to him. So Dr. Adeduntan, I think you can start.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I thank IFRA Nigeria and the Institute of African Studies for this opportunity. Let me begin with a background that is not very pleasant. And that's in the sense that the Institute of African Studies on the continent has not always been a darling of the university. There's this perennial attempt to territorially contain it so that it does not go where the system thinks it shouldn't. I'll be citing two examples, historical examples. The two incidents are temporarily separated from each other by almost 1 century. The first is in Ghana, in pre-colonial Ghana, in the decade leading up to the independence, when a position was advertised, for the head of about to be constituted Institute of African Studies. When one of the applicants showed up, he declined to lead Institute of African Studies. He would rather, lead a more conventional department of sociology, because there's no prospect in African studies. What African studies? What you intend African studies to be is, in a manner of speaking, duplication of what we already are. History, anthropology, no. So most of the scholars had the impression that, career in the Institute of African Studies is almost a dead end. And as a result of that, you then add African studies with a marginal specialization. Sorry, you add sociology, Department of Sociology with a marginal specialization in African studies. But, that would not, go on for a very long time. The second illustration that, I would want to give you happened right here, some 5 years ago, when the the Nigerian University Commission, with some of its operatives that are very, very innocent of the history of African studies on the continent, decided that all institutes in Nigeria and centers, must stop operation or, restructure by being homogenized into orthodox faculties. And I think at that point, I do not have the relevant papers now, but maybe I will do that. I will incorporate all of that when I'm doing my revision. At that point, stakeholders, had to lobby, write petition to make sure that the Institute of African Studies was not involved in that restructuring. So it came that all the institutes and centers within the university, with the exception of Institute of African Studies and Institute of Education, were headed under one faculty of transdisciplinary studies or something like that. Let's now go back to the moment, leading up to the independence. The marginalization that I, talk about didn't go on for a very long time. It was a moment of glory. Independence came, that visionary nationalist, Kwame Nkrumah, became president. And he said that, look, for the kind of nationalist agenda I want to run, I need an Institute of African Studies. So he literally decreed that there should be Institute of African Studies in the University of Ghana. Not that alone, being aware of the kind of institutional attitude to not just the humanities, but Institute of African Studies in particular. He decided that he was not going to put that institute under any vice chancellor. that institute will receive funding directly from the presidency. And that was the beginning of that moment of glory. All academics started, falling over one another, wanting a position in that institute. And that zeal will later percolate into all other institutes of African studies on the continent, including our own institute here, which coincidentally started before that of Ghana, as an autonomous institute of African studies. By 1966, let me quickly read this. Academics, Africanists all over the world, became aware of the volume of research and collection activities going on at the institute. So much that two scholars addressing the African Studies Association wrote this. That's Hans and Cotton, William A. Hans and Philip Cotton, wrote that Ibadan, Ghana, Makerere, or Dakar, the number of the range of Africanists are equivalent to those of most African studies centers in Europe or America. We may be proud of the number of Africanists gathered together at some of our major African studies centers, but no, emphasis now, but no American university can match the quality or number of Nigerians now present on the staff of Ibadan. And it goes on to say that more significance is the awareness of a project that already originated with the African scholars relating to recording, preserving, transcribing, and translating all kinds of orally transmitted knowledge, language, and oral literature, historical traditions, personal biographies, and certain kinds of ethnographic data. So, became the journey to the two archives that we have at the Institute, the Arabic manuscript archives and the Institute of African Studies Audiovisual Archives, holding up to 3,000 files in 16 mm celluloid, reel-to-reel audio tape, vinyl records, microfilms, and hard Arabic manuscripts. The content of these archives, range to documentaries by, popular scholars like Wole Soyinka, J.P. Clark, to manuscripts from North Africa, Morocco, Timbuktu, and all of that, to performances, commissioned performances by the likes of Kola Ogumola and all of that. The economic downturn that happened from the 80s down, took its toll on these archives. Apart from the fact that the equipment that, were being used to access the archive data were no longer serviceable, acquisition also stopped. The files themselves, those materials themselves started going back. As I speak, we do not have any 16 mm celluloid that is salvable anymore. All of them are gone. And the rest of the archive, kept deteriorating. At a point, some of us had to come together to look elsewhere for funding, because the downturn also meant that the perennial, the age-long peripheral placement of African studies meant that when governments started to deprioritize, disciplines like African studies would take the first blow. And as a result of that, paucity of funding meant that we could not maintain the technological process of preserving and accessing this data anymore. So the only option was to look elsewhere. I, as the principal investigator, and about 4 other colleagues on the faculty decided to apply for MEAP grant. MEAP grant is made possible by some a benefaction from Acadia Charitable Organization, which gave that money to University of California, Los Angeles Library to dispense to deserving institutions whose archives are imperiled. I need, to rationalize our choice to apply for that grant. The rationalization is that the only alternative to applying to that grant at that point was, going through the excruciating pain of watching the rest, what remains of that archives disintegrate completely without even being able to access the ones, that are, still remaining. So, there we go. So in this presentation, we applied for that grant and we got it. We are still awaiting disbursement. But in this presentation, I want to show by doing an auto-ethnography of the process of application itself, the pre-application, and event after application. I hope to show the iteration of institutional marginality of African studies in Africa, insinuated earlier. And I also want to discuss the practice of power. In fact, I will begin my discussion with that practice of power in what I call the digital colony. While doing that, I will be de-identifying some of the personalities involved because of the gritty kind of information that is involved in, my discussion. Now, with the ascendancy of the web and algorithm, there's a sense in which archive, as we used to know it, shifted from preservation to production. This is what I mean. It is impossible to digitize all the data that you have in the world. As a result of that, you need to select. And in the process of selecting, your bias and your sentiments will come in. As a result of that, whatever you've decided to select, whatever you've decided to put together, will then inform what you want people to see. If such, body of data is coming from the from the past, it means what you show people is what you want their history to be. As a result of that, the first step in digital archiving is selection. Of course, UNESCO and other bodies have, always appreciated that. So, at the time when we got that grant, or when we were applying for that grant, the Institute of African Studies had, for almost the entirety of its existence, had been committed to not only preserving knowledge, but sharing knowledge, as is reflected in that mandate by Nkrumah. As a result of that, it is not out of the way for us to circulate whatever we produce, share knowledge, publish findings, and even make data in our archives, available, if possible, through open access. One condition for MEAP granting the award is that we must share. Now, we want to share, but you telling me that I must share is power. In other words, there is circuit of power implicated in you telling me that I must do that which I must do, or which I want to do. Dr. Oladejo, you must drink water before the end of this month. Of course you will. But I telling you that is power. And that is the point I want to begin to underline, the implication of power in donor-receiver relation. Of course, I'm locating this in the argument in digital colonialism, where scholars have said that big tech companies like Yahoo, like Google, and all of them are complicit in imperialist surveillance, curated by America. I'm trying to expand that a little bit to include the almost negligible curatorial influence of grant institutions, where grants are not, just given, but they insist on the way to go about in executing the grant. The project. It looks very harmless, and that is the reason why we must focus our attention on it, because it has implications for shaping the kind of history that we put in the archive. One encounter that I want to point at, most of us on that project have had teaching or supervisory routine in a particular course, history and theory of performance in Africa. Yes. In fact, the foundation teacher of that course is on the team. That's Adelusi-Adeluyi. And in the course of having to chart the history of performance in Africa, there's a particular threshold called Photo Play Magazine. I'm not just talking about Yoruba theater performance alone. I'm talking of the entire Nollywood. This is a threshold between stage and screen. Screen as celluloid, as VHS, as DVD or CD, or as Netflix that we have now. Please, slides. See, do you know this? Do you remember this? Does anybody remember this? Oh, 5 minutes. This is Atoka. Students that are turning up for grad, I have taught performance history for more than 10 years now. Students that are turning up for graduate studies don't know this anymore. And that, puts a lot of premium on archiving materials like this. In our decision to digitize archive, we have, resolved that we are not going to, dwell on the archives of the institution of the Institute of African Studies alone. Look for extramural sources, media houses, to see if they can give us things like this. We had to lobby, at one point having to lobby a former minister to get to the publisher of West Africa, publisher of Atoka, West African Publishers Limited, to give us copyright, permission to digitize this. But right from the beginning of the negotiation, since this doesn't belong in our archive, MEAP has some kind of reservation. That's the grant giving body. Has some kind of reservation about us, digitizing this. They would rather have us do what we have in our archive. When we insisted, they say, okay, go on since you have the permission. But the publisher insisted on watermark. And we said, okay, we will do watermark. But MEAP said no. Otherwise, yank it off. We agreed to watermark. We negotiated with the publisher. They gave us that right. The last issue in relation to this related to 1 minute. The use of photography instead of scanning. Photography would take so much energy, labor, and resources than would overhead scanner. But we were told we could not use overhead scanner. As a result of that, we had to resort to the drudgery of photographing every page of Atoka, that came out 2 times in a month for up to 20 years. Imagine the kind of labor that would take. Let me quickly mention that we were also prevented from including in the project digitization of the Arabic manuscripts that are already, in microfilms, because for them it's it's in a kind of digital format anyway. Why would you want to digitize that? But the format in which you have those microfilms now are almost not accessible. They're almost not accessible. We were looking at the possibility of converting them to JPEG or PDF so that there will be easier access, but we are, prevented from doing that. That is not to say there are no impediments from within. And I'll quickly go through them. The impediments from within has to do with, one, the issue of 10%. where the university almost insisted that nothing could be done about deducting 10% from the grant. And we are saying no. The project the project budget had already been, pummeled by COVID-19, inflation, and other things, because it took almost 2 years for us to get through the pre-application, application, and then award process. As a result of that, any imposition of 10% on that grant will pull the plug on the project. And it took more than 2 months for us to say that, look, there's no way you are going to take 10% from this, otherwise we will return that, we'll turn down that grant. Before, thank God, we are an acting vice chancellor in the humanities who decided to, rule out that deduction, 10% deduction. But there's an incident during the process of, negotiation and contestation. A particular officer, very senior officer that I have identified that as AXY. And from here, I will go to my conclusion, please. AXY says, 1 minute, I'm still looking for that code. AXY1, it says, but, it says, now, what will eventually be our gain in all of this? That's in the context of not being able to impose 10% deduction. And I say, look, the context where this person has made that pronouncement is not where he could have had the guts to talk about prebenda considerations like putting money in his own pocket. What he's saying is that the grant is not theirs. And that, for me, underlines that Asian placement of the African studies outside of the university. So the fact that we are digitizing the archives of the Institute of African Studies is not seen as a gain, to the university. What is our gain in all of this? My time is up, madam. Okay, let me quickly conclude. Let me quickly conclude by saying that the old habit of placing the discipline of African studies in the African university institutional periphery means that by a conventional lot, it is among the first to receive any blows of adversities on the academe. In austere times, therefore, humanities libraries, heritage archives, and museums can be saved only after the physical science laboratories. This explains why none of the earliest African studies archives on the continent has any known digital surrogates. Benefaction from external sources sometimes have conditional linings that seem negligible but potent enough to reshape local curatorial intent. This course of digitization of African cultural heritage should engage not only the ways that local choices impact cultural memories, but how redemptive interventions from outside could also decide the overall shape of how we remember ourselves.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think I move straight away to the second presenter. Dr. Kudus Adebayo, I guess it's not here, but Dr. Senayon Olaoluwa is here. We'll be discussing engaging with digital humanities in Africa, preliminary reflections. In just a short introduction in its abstract, digital humanities has undergone critical changes before attaining the status it has now achieved around the world. And so let's see what he has to say. Please, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'll have to hide here. So I'm able to just share the screen with you and with myself. And what we're doing basically is to attempt some preliminary reflections on the digital turn in the humanities and what possibilities there could be. Let me begin by way of sharing with us an anecdote that will appear maybe unrelated to what we are here for. a few years ago, I had the privilege of giving a lecture in my hometown, or maybe one of my hometowns, because I've got hometowns across Ogun and Lagos State. I am from a border zone. So in my hometown, Badagry, and at a point, part of the question I asked was, how come Ogun-speaking people, my people of Badagry, sat there and watched Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther translate the Bible into Yoruba, but my own Ogu people never even bothered about what Samuel Ajayi Crowther was doing? Couldn't you have let him know that, you know what, if you are translating the English Bible into Yoruba, you must also translate it to Ogu. And on that day in the hall, before the Akron of Badagry and others, there was no immediate answer for me. Then a few days after, I met one of the elders who said, son, come and I'll tell you something regarding the question you asked the other time. He said, can you see us here at home? For 300 years, we saw intimately what the white man did to the black man. We are by the coast. Others are in the hinterland. They did the raiding of slaves and all that, but they never made it to Badagry. Only few people made it to Badagry. But we were always here. We were the ones who interacted directly with the white man. I said, that is Blekete market. Human beings were sold there every 9 days for about 300 years. It was not possible if you were in Badagry to be neutral. You either participated, you were either forced to participate in the trade or you became a slave. And because there was already an understanding that you would do all your trading in humans, but Badagry people will not be slaves. So everybody, one way or the other, participated. But what was most intriguing for them was how, after all the evils of about 300 years, they said, the white man came back one day and began to bomb all the sheds, all the locations, all the evidence of the slave trade, removing everything from Badagry and even enforcing it to the point of arresting people. And that before they knew it, there was no longer evidence that the slave trade ever took place, that Badagry was ever a market. And he said, forget about what you see in the museum at Badagry. Those are just some recent imitations. The white man removed the entire evidence. And shortly thereafter came and said, now there was a white God that loved everybody and there will be no difference between the white man and the black man. And he said, at that point, people from other parts of what later became Nigeria jumped at it and became enthusiastic Christians. Because part of the question was, why would Ajayi Crowther translate the Bible into Yoruba, but you didn't even bother about it, that he didn't translate it into your language? They said, you know what, guys? They never saw the white man face to face. We saw the white man, we saw his evils, and we just cannot believe that this thing he calls Christianity will level all of us. And that is the point. And and then the preaching of Christianity lasted only maybe a few years. And the next thing after the Atlantic slavery, they said, was colonialism. And so for them, how could somebody who enslaved us for 3 years come back and talk about a universal God that will take care of everybody and we will believe him? And just to confirm their skepticism, the next thing they discovered that they had all come under the colonial rule of the white man. They said, you see, And that is why Badagry people may never be, particularly enthusiastic. Now, what I am saying in essence is that how is this connected to what we are doing here today and about our initial reflections? In some other contexts, a number of the materials we must digitize now are materials that have been forcefully taken away. And now people struggle to take back all their stolen artifacts and other cultural, materials and other forms of insignias of their memory, of their identity, and all that, and all that, and all that. And then I remember that incident, and I'm like, if the advocacy for digital humanities is coming as usual from the north, from the global north, to what end? Is it not going to be about the latest sophisticated strategy of imperialism in Africa? That is one question. Another question is, should we then, because of that, watch ourselves left behind in the scheme, in the digital scheme of things? So it is particularly, dilemmatic, and we intend to quickly take a look at a few issues. Next slide, sir. And how we may want to go about this. So it has undergone critical changes, that is digital humanities, before attaining the status it has now achieved around the world. The new, humanities or some new field emerged to bring the humanities closer to developments in computer and information technologies. In Nigeria, as with elsewhere in Africa, DH is gaining ground, although slowly. Digital Humanities Association of Nigeria has been formed. In all this, one major concern for us is the voice of Africa in all this. Why is it that ours is to just join the bandwagon of ideas, of concepts, of practices? How come we don't, on our own, come up with practices that can spread to the rest of the world? This, for us, is one question that goes to the heart of the development question in Africa. If Africa is always conceived as a zone, as a receptor of ideas, and then it is after that we say, yes, then we have it in Africa, then it appears there is still a lot more for us to do. And after we have done all this, where do we go from here? Next slide, please. And so, to address critical intellectual research and infrastructural gaps that existed in the traditional disciplines in the human sciences in this part of the global south, in spite of the explosion in digital technologies and computational approaches to studies outside the core sciences, what then do we do? Because another thing I have found out is that when we even jump into the bandwagon, there is still the question of connectivity. Let's illustrate with the ongoing digital archive project at the Institute of African Studies, about which Dr. Adeduntan has brilliantly shared. There are still concerns that after we have completed the project and we can share with UCLA and the rest of the world as co-owners, because that is part of what we have now become, are we always assured of connectivity in a claim where you are never sure of power supply? Are we always assured of connectivity in a claim where you may have 3 different data service providers? And as we jump from one to another, you still discover that you are not connected. And then you are told that you need to get a router. I mean, that performs like a Wi-Fi. And then you get a Wi-Fi, and you still discover that you are struggling to get connected. These are challenges that we still need to address. Otherwise, we'll realize that even after the so-called digital humanities connectivity, we will not all be equally connected. We will all not be equally digitized. You imagine a professor of IAS going into the classroom to do some illustrations from the digital archives. And then he said, and the next thing somebody comes and say, hey, Prof, and then let's start the gen and say, generator. Okay, let's go and buy the diesel. Since the past 1 week, diesel is no longer in circulation in Nigeria. And we begin to ask ourselves, so how do we address all this? These are some of the issues at stake, and for which, in the end, we need more than the intellectual agency. We also need to actually digitize the mentality of the political class in Nigeria and in Africa. Because if they are not mentally digitized, they will never see the logic of digital humanities, and you discover that in the end, we may just be serving as unproductive recipients here while others move away. And when you open the high impact journals and books of this world, they make references to our archives at the Institute of African Studies. And every time you want to do a research, you discover you are not able to access the archives. The question of access, the question of connectivity, the question of disconnectivity. So these are serious issues, and we are making these initial reflections. This calls for a reflection of some key issues in DH, especially as it pertains to Africa. So we move on to the next one, the next slide, please. So the key issues, and then let's see them, a few. The expansion or transformation of the entire humanistic disciplinary orientation will rely on changes in the fundamentals of structures and infrastructures of the society. Like I just said earlier on. So we are excited, we are connected. Sometimes maybe the professor is privileged to be connected. The question is, are the students connected? Will they have access to data? In a postgraduate institute in other climes, postgraduate students are supposed to be paid trainees. They are supposed to be on one form of bursary or scholarship or the other. But here it is completely strange, and that has been on for the past maybe 30 years or so, because I tell young learners and postgraduate students that, hey, Nigerian graduates have been suffering for almost 40 years. So don't finish your first degree and begin to tell me that, oh, I am on the streets and stuff and blah, blah, blah. We have always been on the streets. We have always been on the streets, and we've been on the streets for the past 30 or more years. And what is the implication of that? And so you give assignment to your students, and they tell you that, oh, to access that document, you might need like maybe 5 gigabytes to download. And the question becomes, how do you do that? Then DH must contend with the political economy of higher education in Africa. In Africa, where the government is not persuaded that it can devote up to 10%. Let's begin with Nigeria. It can devote up to 10% for education, in the budget. When that is the case, the question is, when we digitize, to what end? Because by digitizing, we grant a certain kind of new identity to the archives, to the studio, and to all the other materials captured. And that new identity is that of everyday mobility. So by getting connected, you can actually facilitate the mobility of the material to yourself. Now the material in itself is already mobile. So you don't even have to come to the studio before you can work from the comfort of your home. But you want to get started and you discover that if you are caught between, do I spend this money on data or spend it on buying a jalaron for my family this weekend? And you have a deadline. Because as a researcher in the past 10 years, you have never earned a dime as a research grant from the government of Nigeria, from your university. And so how do you go about that? In some other African countries, I mean, things are a bit, straightforward. They are better. In Ghana, for instance, there is this grant, the allowance that is called BRA. I mean, what an acronym. I said, what is BRA? And a BRA actually means a grant for your research and something, and a book and research allowance. Thank you, sir. I'm sure you are from Ghana. He has been to Ghana. Oh, yes, so he's a Ghanaian by association. Thank you, Prof. So you have the BRA, so that, that is also part of how we degender, the use of bra. So men and women can then use the bra, and that way and bra speaks to how we may make digital humanities work for us in Nigeria. But when you, as a scholar in Nigeria, we ask you of your bra, whether you are a man or woman, you discover that you don't have it. And then how do we function? These are the challenges we have, because whether the North-South and intracontinental national divides are there, and the challenges around funding are all still there. How do we prioritization of other disciplinary, areas? Sometimes people ask you, so, oh, you've got a digital archive at the Institute of African Studies. And then the next question people ask you is that, like somebody asked Dr. Adeduntan, Mr. ASMP or what, that, so what is the gain for us? You are in the University of Ibadan and you introduce yourself as a staff of IS, and then people ask you, so what do you do in African Studies? I now have a cheeky answer for them. That is a question for the dead. Yeah, that is a question for the ancestors. And we all know who the ancestors are. Kenneth Dike, Tamuno, Chinua Achebe, J.P. Clark. They are all products of the Institute of African Studies from Ibadan to Nsukka, beginning from Nigeria alone. Achebe was a super, creative writer with promise, by the 60s. But he didn't start as a scholar. He started as a journalist, and then he eventually decided to join the academia. And then he applied to the Department of English, Nsukka, and the head of the department said, well, gentlemen, we can all testify to your ingenuity in creative writing, but not in scholarship. So we can't immediately, and your CV also shows that you made a very weak tutu. So we are not able to recruit you as an academic in the Department of English. You now have to be on probation by going to the Institute of African Studies to learn how to do scholarly research. And so Chinua Achebe wrote those influential essays of his at the Institute of African Studies, University of Nigeria, because he eventually made that journey back to the Department of English. And you still ask us, what do we do at the Institute of African Studies? There are two major institutions. There are two major buildings that connect all of us at the University of Ibadan. One is named after Kenneth Dike, the main library is named after Kenneth Dike, the very first director of the Institute of African Studies here in Ibadan, because he was the first indigenous African vice chancellor. And the second building is the one named after Tamuno. That is the central admin block. Tamuno was also the first UI alumnus to be vice chancellor of this university. And you still ask me what we do in African studies. Now you see, it's a question for the ancestors. So we need to review the way we prioritize. So how and how to teach. Another issue will be, how do you teach, digital humanities to institutions of higher learning? The next slide. So the culture of digitization and analog orientation is another thing. That is another thing we really have to address. When you meet some colleagues who tell you that, no, if you don't have it in the analog form, I am not able to relate with it. So this thing you call, so we still now need to do a lot of workshop and all that. And I'm hopeful Dr. Adeduntan will be able to facilitate that for us, for colleagues everywhere to know that there is a lot of sense in doing this. And a university with an analog system, of journal publishing and everyday running will also not be that disposed to it. I'm sure we are rounding off now. Can we quickly conclude? Do we still have one or two more slides? So how do we engage with digital humanities in a non-digitized environment of knowledge production? Shall we move ahead? So a race toward building digital archives is in many universities. Yes, we are doing that. And funding of digital archives raises the question of ownership and neo-dependency. I mean, I don't want to stress that again because Dr. Adeduntan has done a lot. Next one on that. And the location of the leading journals in the nascent field are in the global north. These are also still issues around digital humanities. The possible entrapment of African scholars anew, and the politics of location and place, which goes back to my anecdote. At the beginning, what alternative outlets for research exchange can emerge on the fringe to the position of African contributions to the field? The next slide, please. So we need to integrate the colonial thinking with digital humanities, disciplinary boundaries and closures in traditional humanities disciplines with limited interdisciplinarity must change. Recruitment practices into departments and units must transform radically. We are rounding off. And then we still need to see how we navigate the question of race, gender, class, and sexuality, including things around how we canonize or, talking about hierarchies of value. So sometimes the question is like Dr. Adeduntan was saying earlier on, what do you digitize? These are issues that, intersect with race, gender, class, sexuality, and disability and knowledge justice. These are all other issues. So when you want to digitize the history of disability in Nigeria, some people tell you, no, but why will you do that? Or you want to digitize the history of madness, of mental illness, and somebody tells you, no, it's not possible. Or you want to digitize the history of prostitution, and somebody begins to say, I will be lie, we can't do that. I mean, these are serious issues that we need to contend with. So with the emergence of the subfield of critical digital humanities, what shifts can we expect? I mean, asked differently, who will be left behind? And we are rounding off. So, and these are some of the issues because they are just initial reflections that we would like to share with you, and we would like to thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Senayon Olaoluwa. It's really a kind of reflection. I hope the audience have been preparing their comments and then questions. But before that, we have the last presenter here, Dr. Babajide Ololajulo, Encountering Africa from Afar, Knowledge Production and Authenticity in the Age of Digital Humanities. His concern is about knowledge production and authenticity, and from looking ethnography from a distance.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Maybe we start from the broad perspective that the director of the institute introduced. And I think there's a point in which we can liaise with the university to provide a bra for everyone in the university. Don't worry about that. Actually, when I got to sit the front here, I thought about changing even my presentation because where I'm seated, I'm tempted to start looking at how power can structure the use of space. I am facing directly some people that they are powerful in their own right, but to my left is seated my moderator who I have to be turning to from time to time, and some other powerful people right at the left. But I also have some very powerful people in front of me. I can see my able professor from my department, the immediate past director of the Institute of African Studies. I can also see Bami seated right in front of me here. So you should not be feeling somehow if I decide to focus my attention right in front of me. So what happens with this presentation, which is titled Encountering Africa from Afar, Knowledge Production and Authenticity in the Age of Digital Humanities? Actually, the thought I'm going to share in this presentation, because it's just going to be a very brief thought, it was gleaned from a roundtable that I attended. I think it's a web seminar, by the way, sometimes in February this year, and it was titled New Tools for Distance Anthropological Research, Web Scraping and Ethnography of Distance Culture in and of Africa. The event was organized by the Council of African Studies, Yale Macmillan Center. So I attended and I listened to a lot of conversation about using digital humanities, especially within anthropological research. So what I'm presenting is going to be a very brief reflection on this, because I'm currently developing this paper, and I think maybe I can get some kind of feedback that will lead to a kind of maybe a full paper in the immediate future. I will start this way. In the post-colonial era, Africa undoubtedly exists as a field of knowledge in which scholars of diverse categories, we have Africans. When I mention African, I mean those that are home-based. We have Africanist scholars, and we have of recent another category we call the foreign-based Africans. We know them. So these three categories are formally and are informally engaged in claim-making over whose intellectual endeavors stand as the most accurate representation of the African reality. In no other discipline is the struggle to own Africa, the struggle to own knowledge production. In no other discipline is it more pronounced than in anthropology, where I belong. Where the postmodernist ideas have successfully countered and successfully instigate a break in the monopoly of the Western scholars over the period of the last 40 or 50 years. In other words, in the last years, we have a situation whereby Africans can effectively also occupy the field of knowledge production about Africa without being accused of self-study. It is not my intention to reignite the debate on the kind of rights to African studies or the study of Africa that African scholars, Africanists, and of recent foreign-based African scholars respectively have, or the privilege is strand of scholarship over another. Although this debate might not have been entrenched or must not have been stretched to the point of saturation, some people thought the debate is no longer relevant. Input of scholars from all the devices have been substantial and insightful. And here I have evidences from scholars like Olukoshi 2006, Cheru 2012. But having evaluated the different views, I've come to align with Iyamjo's 2004 position that the challenge confronting African intellectualism is of promoting commitment to the African humanity and creativity without producing a simplistic reductionism or the infliction of belonging in Africa. In other words, rather than romanticizing belongingness and rendering it a knowledge validating agent, I am of the view that the more circumspection is required, especially for home-based scholars, if and when we must engage in claim making devoid of primordial sentiments. In other words, a criticism of the authoritarian stance of ethnographers flows well with a postmodern view, which diverts the stranger anthropologist of an unchallenged aura of authenticity, an unchallenged aura of authority, an objective perspective, and a singular voice. Thomas 2016. The discontent with the model of ethnography has also taken the form of a decolonization campaign in which, according to Insa Nolte, quote, scholars began to recognize that monologic conception of truth, evidence, and data prevented them from engaging with the assumptions and ideas that shaped lives in different parts of Africa at a base level. In Sanolte 2019. Also, a decolonization approach, according to Bekizwe Dimande, quote, means facing the contradictions and complex notions of the insider-outsider binaries. Within this tradition of intellectual solipsism, the position of native anthropologists and their involvement in a process of ethnographic reconstruction become highly significant, particularly in respect of their commitment to representing indigenous voices in their respective researches. Now coming to this particular presentation, by asking who then among the different stakeholders has greater access to digitized cultures, considering the differentiated level of infrastructure in the two worlds. Are there elements of digital humanities that bring to fore questions of inequality in production and use of digital cultures? How much of Africa is embedded in materials and objects when digitized? My interest in this paper is not simply about the embedded identity of researchers, but more of the epistemological and methodological challenges associated with the adoption of digital media as information tools in ethnographic research. Of course, as anthropologists, we are not averse to this. Right from the early point of anthropology, starting from Margaret Mead and the rest of them, we have seen the usages of media devices in anthropology. But the concern for this particular moment is when there is complete focus on digital media as a means or an alternative means of doing ethnography. How does it fare well with the discipline of anthropology? Anthropologists generally take ethnography as the product of encounters rather than as the work of harvesting data that exists out there in the world, ready to be collected or ready to be read. Contrary to this common knowledge, researchers that are using social media and other digital media as informational tools may not make physical trips to the study locations. In fact, everybody is having the excuse of COVID as a kind of way of staying back wherever they are and collect data from a distance. How this affects the methodology of anthropology is something we are contending with here. I have two main concerns on studying Africa from afar or engaging in distance ethnography, especially the way it can contradict the ongoing commitment to decolonizing knowledge production. First, there is the risk that ethnographic practices of North-based researchers, particularly Africanist scholars, might become more extractive than they are currently. When we talk about extractive now, I'm using the word extractive in the same way extraction is used in mining. Of course, we have within digital ethnography now a terminology known as data mining. So this suggestion being made is about the possibility of a deeper commitment to data mining with little or no consideration for the silences, for the nuances, and the cues that elude digitization, but are also permanent and pertinent to the ethnographic encounter. In the face of ethnography, or in face-to-face ethnography, research participants are aware that they are being observed and they are being listened to. However, this is not the case with digital ethnography. Accused of espionage, it is still left to be determined the adjective that will be used to describe the activities of digital ethnographers. It is enough that digital ethnography already has the challenge of how to access and stimulate the intimacy of contact. And in view of this, Van Four once observed, I quote, "In anthropology, the body is the instrument of data collection. So how does one do ethnography when one is away from the thing that should be embodied? How do you smell, touch, hear, taste, and sense? The digital ethnography definitely does not allow this relationship." End of quote. It is important to note that attempts of scholars to deal with this challenge can come in the form of integrating distance with in-person fieldwork. But this is also not without its challenges. Here, the real concern is about the unequal power situation, the unequal power relation that exists when North-based scholars and their counterparts in the South engage in research collaboration. With digital ethnography, the possibility of the South-based partner being the one to do the fieldwork, while the North-based scholar do the writing and the analysis, this possibility is always there. This is already happening, although little is reported of it. More so that the North-based partner are taught to command higher social capital. I'm using my first grad. So what I mean that this is already happening, and why is it happening? We have a situation whereby the North-based scholars are taught to have a higher social capital, in which it is possible for them to get published in top journals. And as a result of that, the partners in the South are complacent about this situation and are willing to accept whatever interpretation is made out of the data they collected in the course of the collaboration. In all of this, it is the authenticity of knowledge produced from a triangulated, or what I call a biangulated research, that should come to focus. I must state here that it is also not uncommon for the South-based partner to allow analysis and interpretation to run contrary to the field observation, even if it is so glaring, because the supremacy of the North-based researcher in such collaboration is always obvious. So in other words, what we are having is a situation of the power relationship being reproduced through the North and South asymmetries of power in research. And this is something we'll be contending with. So, in conclusion, the digital possibility, which we must agree has transformed humanities, especially in terms of access to data, is always there to enrich data production. But how it is used in discipline like anthropology is something that is left to be determined. Is it going to change anthropology to another discipline entirely? I think time will tell. Thank you.
One more round of applause for the three presenters. Their presentations have been very inciting and very reflective. And as a result of that, I'll just give a kind of summary. Dr. Adeduntan in his presentation focused more on the dangers of adopting grants that will shape digital humanities in the Institute of African Studies. Is concerned about challenges of collating sources that goes into archiving and how the granting bodies actually dictate the direction at which these grants will be used. And is bothered about how this will affect eventually the purpose at which the Institute of African Studies is meant to serve on the African continent, considering the fact that within Africa itself, we have our internal challenges within operating the university system. For instance, he made reference to the internal issues such as the 10% that the university tends to concentrate on or impose on grants. And for Dr. Senayon Olaoluwa, he gave us a kind of reflection into to what end or purpose should we be bothered about digital humanities. And then he focused more on what development question is for Africa, considering the fact that what is going to be the voice of Africa in this. And in this, I can see a situation where we have to be concerned about the global north, global south dichotomy in assessing digital scheme. He acknowledged the fact that we don't need to shut out ourselves in accessing digital advantages, but at the same time, he is concerned about the internal problems we have in Nigerian higher education system, such as the problem of connectivity, the students, how are the students going to access this, considering the fact that he made reference to Ghana, where Ghana has a kind of program called BRA. And I like the way he was trying to make us laugh around that concept anyway. So generally, this comes under the problem of political economy of higher education in Africa. Then he is concerned about how we'll even teach digital humanities itself, considering the fact that we have issues of race, gender, class, and sexuality, and how these things intersect and intertwine when we determine how we are going to use digital humanities. Then there is this question, what should be left behind and who should be left behind? Then for the third presenter, Dr. Ololajulo, is more concerned about how digital humanities is going to affect ethnographic research, considering the fact that we are all aware that there is this inequality between the global north and global south. And there is this tendency that global south researchers do research for global north researchers, and the global north researchers tend to publish in high impact journals, while we are just wondering on how to get ourselves into high impact journals here. So global south doesn't have a say in how the data is also interpreted. Because at times, even in history, we have that challenges when data is harvested, they tend, in the global north, they tend to interpret it differently from how we interpret it here. So at the end of the day, this power relations in knowledge production is a concern of Professor Dr. Ololajulo. So in conclusion, he is concerned about the fact that how will digital humanities be used in anthropology in Africa subsequently. So I welcome questions and comments from the audience. I think let's do it this way. We have a first round of 5 questions, and you name the person your question is or comment is directed to. So number 1, Dr. Number 2, I can see you. Number 3, number 4. Yes, I counted you as number 1. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Okay. So.
Yes, thank you so much. I want to thank all the presenters for their reflection on the subject digital humanities as it relates to African studies. However, Dr. Senayon identified, what he felt that the digitization of the mentality of the African political class. No doubt that education has been, at the receiving end, whether African studies or any other discipline. How do you think that the mentality of the African political class, can be digitized such that it will be relevant, to the promotion of digital humanities in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that important query, Dr. Adeduntan. As to maybe the most important thing next will be how metadata is handled so that it doesn't or they do not defeat the ultimate aim of this digitization, because questions of power also come in, isn't it? That's such a powerful one. I just like to quickly remind us that I'm just coming from a decolonization conference, that the whole process of digitalization has not always come from foreigners. So it's important we get this. And as far as Nigeria is concerned, we've been part of this whole digitization program, even in the Badon area here. And I think one of the earliest digital projects in West Africa, probably the first, was in Bodija, the one for which, with a cohort, we evolved the concept of IFANET in 1996. And we started. That same time, after a while, some people came who were thinking of what was the future. I'm moving to the next point. I'm moving to the future of some of this data, even in African studies and digital humanities, maybe 3 years afterwards. The professors in UI were all united against me inside IFRA, this same IFRA, because they said what we needed then was VHS, because we do not need, I'm not saying professors from IAS, from UI, that what we needed were VHS and those kinds of facilities, because all these other things spoil. We do not know how to handle them. So the second point keys me to the methodological issues in digitization. The methodological issue is that this is the first time in the history, because a theory of it is also important, because the entire theory of how knowledge comes to people from face to face. The earliest phases that we've ever had, from oral to written, and the other phases of writing, and the electronic. The electronic has been so long, but it's been the analog phase. This current digital phase of mankind is the most important moment that has shifted the capacity of power residing in age. It has been shifting, but this is the most significant in terms of qualitative leap. And to that extent, this is the source of a lot of the kind of crisis that we're having now, such that this is one kind of technology that evolves per second. The capacity of aging can't cope with it. So even the methodology of teaching and the rest has got to change. So the question is not about trying to go and educate some people and trying to. No, the professor, I mean, what I mean by professors, the lecturers. The lecturers themselves do not have a clue as much as their students. They do not. They have a few theories. That's Senayon and I didn't know bamboozlers and all that. The others may not have the theory as much, but they will tell you the most important thing, and it's by the day. By evening, Twitter has done one new thing. By evening, WhatsApp, so the quantitative nature of this phase is one we have to recognize. So when you are even doing, like in our programs in cultural and media studies, we try to emphasize roundtables around most of our conversation. Roundtables in which we all become mutual learners and mutual, mentors in terms of the process. So what I'm saying, therefore, is that this is also important. So for the digitization process, it's important to know that we're part of that what's called decolonizing process on this part of the. And the very, very last point, please, concerns. Sorry. The very last point you raised concerning. Goodness, I miss it. You raised it particularly, but I was going to raise it with you maybe afterwards then. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Comment and question is for Dr. Adeduntan. My personal opinion is that capital is not neutral. So whoever funds a project has some form of influence because the money comes from somewhere too. And I also believe that even when the President Nkrumah was funding the First Institute of African Studies, he had an agenda too. So I'm not judging, but that's my opinion. So my question is that what local initiatives, what do you think can be adopted, like local initiatives? Because we can't continue to rely on foreign funding, foreign interventions for these things. And I'm asking you this because of your experience in the field. My own personal opinion is that we can adopt personal methods. So, like personally, I digitize my family's archive. I interviewed my grandfather because I realized that things that as minute as his ID card from the 70s are part of the family history and invariably part of the nation's history also. So I encourage people to do things like that also. So, and also I'm on a campaign to tell culture bearers, lecturers that as they are retiring, maybe they should get a student to digitize their notes and all of these things. People have personal archives scattered all over. So how do we bring these things together? And also, there's a precarity with being a Nigerian. Anything can happen. And okay, the Twitter ban is an example now. And so you find out that it's become clear to everyone now that the current administration has the power to shut down the internet, and there will be nothing that will happen to it. So how can we build infrastructures, things that are homegrown? So that's my question. And the second question has been asked by the first person. It's for Dr. Olaoluwa. About how do we digitize the mentality of the political class? And when I talk about the political class, I'm particular about university educational gatekeepers also. I understand that the people at the ministry and all of those people are politicians. How about people who are our own people, who are internal gatekeepers, like the UI authorities requesting for 10%, something that they are supposed to do, that they are not doing. A foreigner is decided to do it, and they are still asking for. I'm sorry, but I think it is madness. Yeah, it has to be. So how do we digitize the mentality of people like this? And you find out some of them are actually from our own communities. But when they get to power, it's like something happens to them and you find out that they change. So how do we change this trend? Those are my questions.
Well, let me just start from the last speaker. Dr. Adeduntan, we've been talking about this yes, so not the last speaker, but to Dr. Adeduntan, talking about this donor gods. Of course. Yes, I saw that you got this donor gods. Yes, of course. It is those that play. How do they put that thing? That who
play the pipe dictates. Yes, that's usually the thing. But again, the problem is that even here in our local area, those of us in academics, we've only been looking at outside for funds. Whereas in the local area, at times, there are some people who are interested, because I have that experience in Ife. When we are trying to do something, we approach one of the chiefs in Ife, who, in fact, the building, which our Natural History Museum building, which I am now the director, was funded through a local contact. So if we need to be doing that. But if we just depend on, so it's the foreigner that we, have to give us funds most of the time, that may not be true something. But whoever give the money, at times, demand that they want to, this is what they want. But it's you that I want to let them know what you want to do. What you want to do. Then in your presentation, you are talking about selective in digitizing archival materials. When you are selective in digitizing materials, you are being subjective. Why can't we digitize everything that we have? And then digitization, like what my friend said there, is not just a new thing. The early researchers, I remember Professor Oshoba in the History Department in Ife, their works, their recordings of the history in Ondo, just of recent, about a few years ago, the Harvard University requested that we should transcribe those things. They digitize all those historical materials. In this, what they call that one? This tape, this small tape recordings. So they have it. So, but we need not to be subjective. We need to see whatever we have that we can digitize. Again, you said that in the issue of African studies, digitizing archival materials, but I did not hear you talking about digitizing archaeological materials, because that is important. Yes, I will explain. There are a lot of these artifacts. Yes, in African studies. I remember, yes, in the 70s. Yes. In fact, I was part of it. I remember when we started the excavation, my excavation experience was in 1977. And it was in these African studies that we have Tostan Shaw, Kavukuresi, and others. So most of this work, we need to digitize them, because there are some of these artifacts that has been stolen. But if they are digitized from the different angles, you can keep them like and then people can refer to them. So that one we have to. Well, the grant problem in university, just like what my son, I won't say my brother, my son said, it is a big problem. And that is what we in academics should be fighting for at times. Because you get grant, in your write-up, in your right research grant, you've stipulated what you want to use it for. But when you get to the university, 10%. Not even 10% is not even the problem. For you to even access that fund is wahala. What you need to do within 3 months, for you to get the fund might take you 6 months. And even in trying to access the fund, those who are in charge of the fund, maybe in the budget section, there's something, the auditor will want to see you, even messenger will want to see you to tackle. And that is why talking about digitization of the mentality of our people. Because there are a lot of problems there. In fact, in most of this research work now, you want to do something now. In fact, it's just painful at times you see some professor, because now they've become either the GO of a church or imam of a church. It is a problem for you or for them to do some research work, or to even approach some people on some research work, because they will tell you that it is out of their religious something. In fact, I asked a student to go and work on Oduduwa Grove. He said, God forbid. So what is God forbidding in our grove? So we need to, I don't know which forum do we have to do that, because it's so painful to me at times when I see people with this religious something. Our father, were they not religious when they were alive? The way they approach their God is what they know. So we need to digitize that mentality, and I think we have to start now. Thank you.
My question goes to Dr. Adeduntan. And thank you about the background on the Institute of African Study, because I once asked the question, why Institute of African Study? Why Institute of African Study? What was the essence? But from the background you gave about the history, about how it emerged, has changed my perception. Thank you about that. Then on the issue of your topic talks about audiovisual material. It deals with audiovisuals, I think, yeah. And my worry is access. Now, when it is digitized, how do you intend to digitize it? Is it on the web? If it's on the web, how do people get access? Is it open access? Is it going to be regulated and all that? I'm just wondering, maybe you can, explain further on that. Thank you.
First person who intervened directly in relation to my presentation, saying something about capital not being new. Of course, yes. But the fact that it's not new doesn't mean you do not engage it. I mean, for me, it's very defeatist to say that it's always been here, and therefore we should keep it so. And I'm also, I'm going to, give you two more instances in, in the process of that application, pre-application and award, that shows that when you contest that hegemony, you could get things changed. I gave you the example of the preference of MEAP, the preference for keeping the photoplay magazine out of a project. We said we are going to do it. They said, okay, you can't do it with overhead scanner, you must do it with camera, photo camera. Yes, we will do it. What we'll do is that we are going to change the composition of the work by hiring 2 more people, to take, and we are going to buy a camera. And it gets to a point where they say, no, you can't do it if you must use watermark. Because we had to ensure the publishers that the copyright will be guaranteed if we put watermark. And, that changed their attitude from reluctance to willingness. And now you're asking us to go back to say we're not going to use watermark anymore. I had a feeling that the intention of, trying to dispense with watermark was just to throw out the Atoka component. And thank God we were able to go through the route that we went to get permission. And we got the permission to go on without the watermark. You don't get anything if you don't fight. Now, and another thing has to do with which other area did we contest? But let me just leave that so I can move on quickly to the next aspect of your question, which is what personal intervention have we made before going, sourcing for external help. Hey, I don't want to go there. We've gone as far as maybe Shola Oloruyomi and Delela Iwola using personal computers, calling for help from a couple of people from the media center, to help pass a line from that computer to a disused reel-to-reel player, to do a kind of digitization. But for how long are we going to do that? Look at the process it's going to take. And this digitization is going to be real time. Every one of those records must play from beginning to the end. Over 3,000 items. I will do an intervention from 1, 2, 3 faculty members take care of that. It's massive. It's only an institutional intervention from the government or the university that can take care of that. At the point when I am not very disposed to the idea of asking big donors from the West for assistance. But at that point, the only option was just to leave that archive to disintegrate, which is far, far more emotionally excruciating than begging for money. about the precarity of keeping data in Nigeria. Of course, the only hope we are first, we've decided that we are going to put what we have digitized in the cloud. But you know how unrealistic that could be in view of some of the conditions you've mentioned. Our last hope is that we are going to share them. We are going to share them so that, God forbid, that we lose them in future. We'll still have, and you know, to actually validate that some of the celluloid films that we have lost are with Royal Anthropological Institute, massively. Some of them, just some of about I can talk about, I can say that of about 4 of the 16 MMs. So that is so I guess that also takes care of what you said the other time about somebody paying the piper and dictating the tone, sir. There's nothing, you know, wrong about contesting that that capital, and about looking for other sources, maybe within or outside. In the context of the situation we have found ourselves, we have tried, I mean, as far as I can date it back to maybe the time before Olaoluwa became the director, there have been several moves to get the university, not just the university, institution from without, fund this project without any success. Let me give you one example of one of the encounters I had when I was trying to lobby extramural institutions from outside, you know, to give up what the items in their collection for digitization, because it is a common occurrence in Nigeria that most of the memory institutions, archives, museums, and all of that, they are prone to disaster like rainstorm, fire. I have one that idea identified here as BXY2. It has suffered rainstorm and fire about 2 times. So much that what they have in the archive is now about 20%, sorry, 50% of what they started with. When we, you know, told them about the possibility of helping to digitize the audiovisual materials that, you know, they have left, the first thing they asked was, how did you get the money? How much will you give us?
digitized. That is exactly the point I am making. Otherwise, we're not going to get the funding, we're not going to get the support. Every time in Nigeria, ASU is mentioned, what the political class hears is that's PDP. ASU is even worse than PDP, the opposition party, as far as the Nigerian government is concerned, because they are worse than PDP because members of the PDP are also in the National Assembly. Members of the PDP are also governors, including Makinde. But when you are ASU, you are not, so you don't have anything to share with them. So you are in opposition. And it does, and sometimes the assumption is that you were even responsible for the leave of absence of the first lady for some time. And so, I mean, why must anybody, be kind to you? And that is the real challenge that we have, and for which we must also digitize the mentality of the African political class. So that is, and then talking about why do we have to do all this? It is, and that is why we also need the reinvention of Africa. The whole idea of invention of Africa, Mundibi and all, it's about the exogenous agency, that has resulted in the present equation of what we call Africa. Africa invented from outside. Now Africa has to be invented from within. And if you are doing that, that is going to be reinvention. And if you are reinventing for development, the political class must see itself as a core stakeholder to move us and to dictate what we do, and not wait continually for the West to tell us what to do. And that is extremely important. So issues around, selective digitization will still go back to the other issues. Who determines what to digitize? The question of power within and outside. That is extremely important. And yeah, the conversation can always, continue.
I want to add something. We also have professors in the political class. And I think he raised a question that why is it that even at the university level, by the time they move away from us, something becomes.
Yes, because they have joined the ruling party. So if they have joined the ruling party, they don't see themselves as ASU again. But more importantly, see what we see at the local level, at the institutional level, where your professor, who has been such an incredible scholar, takes up an administrative position and begins to play politics with you. It's a reflection of what goes on in Abuja. And that is why when the political class is transformed, you are going to realize that all the other sectors of the society will be as transformed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. While sitting here, I got a question from the audience sent to me that I should explain my reservation with ethnography. Simply, ethnography is just the act of conducting ethnography on the net. It's not a personal issue I have per se, but for anthropology, this has to do with methodological purity. Anthropology as a discipline actually prides itself on its methodology, which is participant observation. Immediately there is anything that is threatening participant observation, it is actually changing the discipline. And although they have several times in which the call for reinvention of anthropology itself has made, the discipline has held tightly to that aspect of the methodology, which it thinks differentiates it from other disciplines. So hence, without participant observation, which is very difficult when we're talking about ethnography, anthropology will refuse or will cease to be anthropology. Thank you.
I was told there's someone on Zoom. The person is Zoom, and the person not leave the question. Okay, let's take another round of questions. He had earlier signified 1, 2. Okay.
Thank you, the three presenters.
First of all, let me start from why African Studies. In 2015, I was privileged to be at the Center for African Studies, University of Florida. That center controls 64 different departments. All the departments are integrated within that center. So if you are doing anything that has to do with Africa, it must pass through that that center. So even here, while we are still, talking of the late Stone Age, they are talking of ages far ahead. All of these things, they've emphasized some of these problems earlier. And I remember also, like Prof. Olaoluwa said, here in Ibadan, there were attempts to conceive, to think ahead, but along the line, some people will certainly bungle it, and I think that's exactly what happened. That is where we are at this very point in time. Also, to talk about when he was talking about grants and all, it is a problem in the university. In University of Ibadan, 3 years ago, we got a grant from the American Embassy, and we got to the University of Ibadan. University of Ibadan is supposed to provide counterpart funding for that fund. We got to the University of Ibadan. Sir, they said you should give us more funds to carry out this project. The University of Ibadan said no. Rather, the University of Ibadan was asking for 10% of what. So I had to go to the vice chancellor that, look, if is it that you allow this thing to be as they've given us, or we'll tell them in the embassy that we are not ready. That we are not ready. So that was when the vice chancellor now said, okay, you guys should go ahead and do the work. The University of Ibadan did not have 1 naira to what they were expected to give us counterpart funding. So the problems are there. The problems are there. The issue of FPO, that's another major issue entirely. I want to put my question to Dr. Olajulo. I hope this thing, because the global north, it seems to be at advantage, particularly in the issue of ethnography. You want to tell me you want to go to the field, high-to-high contact, personal contact is key in anthropology. Forget about all these. It's in fact, it's the ingredient. That's the bedrock of anthropology. I hope as we continue, it's not going to be to the advantage of the global north. We're even having more advantage than us, than what we are talking of presently. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, all the presenters. Let me quickly just react to what Prof said as to even sorting for research grant to look inward. In fact, the major problem we are facing with digital humanities, in fact, the whole problem started from the inward. We can now imagine, for instance, even the university, the base of research works that's supposed to know the importance of transparency and accountability. And they're supposed to have even prepared to fund the research properly. And in fact, interestingly, the bribe being referred to by Dr. Senayon Olaoluwa in his presentation. In fact, in the history of University of Ibadan, I'm fully aware that there had been a point in time, early 80s, they still award a book and research grant to those staff who are on study leave. They do that, but just of sudden, they stop it. And unfortunately, many of these people, unquote, they have enjoyed many of these things. Ridiculously, let me cite an example of a particular researcher in person of John Unwick, now of late memory. Yeah, he contributed immensely to Arabic manuscript collection, not only within the Center of Arabic Documentation here in the Institute of African Studies, but in Africa as a whole. Unfortunately, when the man passed on, he now decided, because of the contribution he has made in Nigeria, and he know that we value that contribution well, he decided to pass on all his legacies to Ibadan. In fact, what remains is to ship those materials from US down to Ibadan. Unfortunately, all our effort, all our efforts, those who are concerned, Department of Arabic and Islamic Study, the institute here, in fact, prove abortive. Nowhere to even raise, only token money. Another country just benefited from that huge of opportunity. These are some of the things until our leaders, we have changed. In fact, because if you fail to do the right thing and any opportunity coming from external or whatever, I don't think it's normal. In fact, it's a high level of unaccountability. That is why they are now requesting for 10%. And I think this is a collective fight that even ASU supposed to stand again, because universities are supposed to provide for all this fund, but individual will now struggle to now bring in the fund. And of course, they have already attached conditionalities to that. Okay, by the time they now award the grant, and we are now in our response to a budgeting report on that, 10% deducted by University of Ibadan. The question will be, for what? Is that in line with what we've already at least presented the money for? Unless we have change of attitude, otherwise, all these digital humanities, we continue to suffer. And the priority we are giving to other aspects of knowledge, I mean by science and so on, unless our leaders just have changed. Even the staffing, a humanity is become a big problem at the university level. Instead, science, tech, and so on. See, that is why many people are asking, what are they doing? The Institute of African Studies. And they are saying there are living evidence to show that African studies, they are making a high quality contribution to knowledge and research at the. Thank you very much.
There is a unique society that exists on the digital. Okay, is by comment and contribution. There is a unique society that exists on the digital space that realize their own humanity on that space. Now, my question is, does the digital interface not represent a form of eye-to-eye contact in the study and methodology of anthropology? And if we keep insisting on the physical form of eye contact, are we not trying to exempt a particular generation from the reality which they produce and consume on a unique space that is actually different from what the physical space represents? Are we not saying in the 21st century, are we not rejecting a particular reality that what we realize on the digital space is quite different from the physical anthropology we are seeing in the physical space, and that the methodology in the discourse of digital anthropology should be different from the methodology in the discourse of the physical anthropology? We must start asking such questions and start asking our students, how do they produce and consume knowledge and humanity within the digital space? Because the netizens understand clearly what they do on that space, and the professors and doctors should ask questions and learn and relearn of what these persons do on these spaces. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Like I said earlier, this is not the very first era when anthropology is being challenged to change or modify its methodology. And then, like, if you listen to the presentation initially, digital methodology is not strange to anthropology. I mentioned as at the earliest period of the discipline, we've been employing digital devices. We've been recording culture. We've been capturing everydayness on tapes, and then we'll be preserving this over generation. The real question is replacing the face-to-face encounter, because anthropology is about encounter. Without face-to-face encounters, you can have the nuances of a culture, the silences of a culture, the cues of a culture that cannot be digitized. And these are very crucial to our interpretation. There's no doubt that we have a segment of anthropology that is already flowing with the netography. It is, you see, it's a radical discipline that accommodates a lot. And that is why you can hardly see any human endeavor that is not captured by anthropology. Anything you do as a human being must have an anthropology. There's anthropology of eating, nutritional anthropology, everything we do, anthropology of crime, anthropology of prostitution, everything we do as human beings. But we are not going to substitute the face-to-face interaction with this online interface. You see, it is easy. My presentation basically is about somebody engaging another person in a faraway culture to collect data through digital devices that he now sits in the comfort of his own room elsewhere and interpreting. It won't work. You cannot contract out ethnography. You can't contract it out. You just have to be there. Being there in anthropology is crucial, and it will continue to be important to the survival of the discipline. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the presenters, to the audience, and to the organizers of this program. And so we have come to the end of this session. Let's just give ourselves a round of applause.
Let me thank our last panelists. Thank you. Before you go, let me say a few closing remarks, but very quickly, I promise after that you can go for lunch, which is ready. Can you hear me? Not very well? You're right. Just very quickly, I just want to thank you all for being here today and for participating in this very fascinating conference. I like the way the conversation became heated at the end. I really enjoyed it. But before that, let me just thank, first all the members of the scientific committee. I'm doing that right now because our conference is not yet over, but this afternoon we won't have time to do so because the French ambassador is coming and the representative of the VC will be there as well, and it will be speeches. So I guess I wanted to give more like an academic ending to it as well right now. So first, let me thank the four members of the scientific, well, the three other members of the scientific committee. Dr. Cyrielle Maingraud-Martinaud is just here. Dr. Ademide Adelusi-Adeluyi, who was online yesterday and today, even if it was late for her. And Dr. Senayon, Olaoluwa, who just gave a brilliant paper. So thank you all. I really liked it. I really liked as well the way Dr. Senayon stressed that DH could create forms of inequalities. And clearly here we saw that we had a lot of brilliant papers, but not enough given by women. So maybe it's a gender bias that we need to revisit in the future. In general, I really like the conference. Let me tell you why. I like the way Prof. Olaoluwa revisited the long history of DH in general. And I also like the way Dr. Senayon as well talked about the need to reinvent maybe Africa from inside. It's not my place to say that, obviously, but this reminded me of Valentin Mudimbe's book on the invention of Africa. I really like that. I like the way as well our two first speakers, Gloria and Confidence, sorry, forgive me, talked about the creation of a community of people in general. I like the word community here because I think that's why DH is doing to all of us. In general, I think DH is creating a common language between disciplines and scholars in Africa. And I like the way we tried to talk about the way we need to redefine disciplinary boundaries in general. And if there's one call which I really like, is the way the decolonization of knowledge asks us to think about, our own disciplines. See, I'm a historian here, and I know sometimes some of the sources or some of my own methodologies can be outdated and can somehow reinforce certain biases and entrench them somehow. So I need to think about them. in general, I liked, we all thought about the potential of DH offered by DH. And that's something that co-attribution in his paper showed us very quickly. We all hope that, DH will bring something, new research questions as well. That's what we had in the paper given by Onyekachi Peter Onua in literature, obviously, but also by Macha Mangut in archaeology in the north, and Bashir Maiwada as well at ABU. And here I'm mentioning the north as well, because just to say that, it's not just this conference is online. It's not just happening at the University of Ibadan, but it's also ABU is happening. There's a Center of Digital Humanities as well at the University of Lagos. And I think it's important to mention them as well here. We've got new research questions as well, as showed by Bruno Veras, who talked about fragments of memory. I liked the word fragments here. I think it's a very important one, because maybe we're finally piecing up together the fragments of the past, thanks to digital humanities. Maybe we're also preserving our past, our own culture. And that's a paper given by Yo Adu from Ghana. It was about music. I really enjoyed that as well. Maybe we want to disseminate our research. And it's something that I really liked in the paper given by Israel Abayomi Saibu and Felix Bayode, who talked about the Ijebu-Ode Festival. So thank you for your paper. I know we've got to leave right now, but thank you for your paper. Dr. Ademide Adelusi-Adeluyi, who was here with us this morning, talked about Lagos. I'm sorry, I apologize to her again because of our technical difficulties, but again, he showed us how we can enmesh different methodologies together. Finally, of course, I'd like to talk about the two last papers who talked about the way we disseminate research and the way we can talk to a new wider audience. That was a paper on How Far Nigeria by Olakunle, Olusola, Kuti, and by Etim on the Nigerian Nostalgia Project. Finally, our last paper, last panel on the power relationship asymmetry here. Given, it was a heated conversation, that's why I really enjoyed it. And I really liked the papers given them by Dr. Senayon, as I said before, but also by Dr. Babajide Ololajulo and Dr. Adeduntan. I think that's important conversation to be had here, because actually of the way the Institute of African Studies was created more than 60 years ago in Ghana, but also in Nigeria. And clearly he was part of the remit of these two institutes, of these two twin institutes somehow, to discuss this. And when we hear in Europe sometimes decolonize the knowledge, decolonize this and that, actually people tend to forget actually people started 60 years ago, well before, the parts of the world, it's not a new thing again, as I'm trying to say here. The moot point here, the crucial point here is definitely the question of money. It's the center of the problem here. And I can't say I'm going to solve the problem myself here. I'm as a French citizen working in a British university who's currently a director of an institute funded by the French taxpayer. I cannot solve it right now, but still, I've just talked about my institute here. And I'd like to talk about as well why we're here, because we want to establish a collaboration, a relationship with researchers on kind of not on one day, not just for one event, but for more than 1 year, more than 2 years, for 5 years, 10 years, and so on and so forth. Again, not solving problems right now, but trying to establish this kind of form of relationship, which I hope in the future will be more and more equal. Again, it's not perfect, but I hope, it can be improved. And I guess that leads us to what's next. I promised to talk about what's next, First, I'd like to say that all the papers of this conference, including the interventions from the audience, are recorded as we speak, as I'm speaking right now. They should be available on IFRA's website by the end of the month, if we can make it happen. So that's a good thing. There's going to be an archive of it. Secondly, as you know, some of you know, IFRA Nigeria is involved in the preservation of archives. We called it this project Nigeria Archives, but I'm more than interested in collaborating with other people. Not just paper archives, because I'm a boring historian, but also archaeology, be reassured. I've seen the storage of the archaeology department, thanks to Prof. Alibi here. I've seen them, I've seen crates of archaeological, remains from Borno, from Benin Gazagamo, from different parts of Africa, Ghana, Nigeria. Ibadan is extremely rich, and I think there's so much to be done. Let's work together to make it happen. Then, I hope that we'll be able to carry on this conversation, and we discussed earlier today, but also before last week and last month, even with Dr. Cyrielle Maingraud-Martinaud, the creation of a workshop series, which will be done in a hybrid format IFRA Nigeria to carry on this conversation with today's participants, but also those who couldn't travel today to come to talk to us, and with those who like to work with us. So let me end by just saying, I really liked talking to all of you today. Of course, I'll be available during the lunch time, which is happening right now. We're going to start again the conference at 2 p.m. There's going to be a short 10-minute talk by the representatives of the VC, by the Deputy VC admin, then followed by a lecture by Professor Egbokare on Naija on linguistics in general at 10 past 2. Thank you again, and please go and have lunch. Thank you.
Y'avait pas d'image, y'avait pas de couleur, y'avait pas d'histoire, mon âme sœur. Y'avait pas les fêtes, mais y'avait pas le cœur, aucun sourire, mon âme sœur. Tu sais, le monde ne tournait pas rond, j'avais les mots, mais pas la chanson. Tu sais l'amour, tu sais la passion.